All right, we're live. Thank you, everyone, for attending and reconvening the meeting. The next portion of the training is crisis intervention training with Lieutenant Mullen.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm John Mullen. I'm the new crisis intervention team coordinator of the division. I started that role about 2 months ago. Nice to meet you all.
Welcome.
All right, the first thing we're going to go over is our current policies. I apologize, but after the meeting, we'll provide you with everything that we go over here. So we currently have 3 crisis intervention policies: the crisis intervention team response, crisis intervention team program, and crisis intervention team definitions. Those were actually worked on last year and filed and approved by the federal court in October. And this week, we sent these all out to the division members so they can read them. They have to acknowledge that they read them. There's a little information sheet that we updated, and then they take I think it's an 18 or 19 question test to make sure that they understand.
That was assigned to all of us on the LMS.
Yes, through our LMS, thank you. And so then that way we're able to track that the officers have it. They're usually given about a month to complete that, and then once that time goes, then we'll roll that out division-wide. For the crisis intervention team definitions, like I said, it was filed with the court in October 2022. On that one, we added some key definitions to include the Cuyahoga County Diversion Center, which is where we try to take a lot of the people in crisis. Lowercase d, uppercase D, deaf, and then trauma informed. And again, you'll be getting all those. Okay. For the crisis intervention team program GPO, we also filed that in October 22, and we're also currently under review. There are some things that we noticed that need a little updating. So on a yearly basis, as part of the consent decree, we go over some of these GPOs and provide our updates. And with that one, we're going to cross-reference a separate GPO for warrant services. We're going to clear up a section on executing arrest and probate warrants. There's some confusion in the division about a probate warrant and if it gives you the same authority to enter a residence without permission to get that person under a probate warrant. It does not. It's a civil order. And so we're just clearing up the way that these GPOs read. So all our members are clear on that. Now we're not going to be kicking down a door to enter a residence to serve a probate warrant. For that one, we're also, another thing that we found in reviewing the video, we're going to emphasize with the division that the specialized crisis intervention team officers shall have the primary responsibility of handling a scene, including when an officer of higher rank is on scene. So normally the officers go on scene, and when a supervisor comes, they kind of take over the scene. But we specifically train these officers in specialized crisis intervention, so they have the expertise. So we want even supervisors to defer to them for their knowledge and their expertise in the situations. For the crisis intervention team response GPO, again, that one is currently also under review, but filed with the court. We're going to make policy clear about the difference between a probate warrant, which, like I said, is a civil order, and an emergency hospitalization form, which is commonly referred to as a pink slip. And we're also going to make it a little clear about the requirements for our division members to transport on a pink slip by a third party. So if an officer gets called to a psychologist and they have a signed pink slip form stating that this person is an emergency state and they need to go to the hospital, that we shall transport them. I'll go over some of our training. I provided each of you with a list of some of the training that we go through. So the training that for crisis intervention is required by the consent decree. I'll just touch on a few of the paragraphs. Paragraph 143 touches on the training of new recruits. We used to give them 16 hours, but now currently they have 24 hours of crisis intervention training. And then the training of all officers. The first year we rolled this out, everyone had 8 hours in that first year. And then every year during our in-service, we have 4 additional hours based just on crisis intervention. We also have specialized CIT officers and field training officers, and they go through an additional 40-hour class of specialized CIT training. The training that we do, the curriculum was developed in conjunction with the Community-Based Mental Health Advisory Committee, participation by the training subcommittee, and reviewed by MRAC, which is a Mental Health Response Advisory Committee. The Department of Justice and the monitoring team provide subject matter experts to address the content and to make sure there's adult learning approach required. Adult learning in that. The training division has taken an active role in working with the MRAC training committee to provide consistency and quality assurance in the training. And these topics are taught by both subject matter experts and individuals with lived experiences. So in our in-service, we have some of our officers teach the academies and the courses. With these courses, we actually have people in the field that are coming to teach. So people that work for MRAC, people that work for NEOC, because they're the subject matter experts. So we want them to help us out on that. And then the handout that I gave you, some of the topics that we taught, and they go into a little bit more. Currently this year for in-service, which I was just at, the 4-hour block was on suicide prevention. So for the specialized CIT training, these are voluntary officers that want to take this class. We do require that our FTOs take the class, but they do not have to be designated as a specialized CIT officer at the end of the class unless they choose to. Because the goal of this is to have all voluntary people that want to do this training. There are 3 classes scheduled for this year. We just had a class March 20th to 24th. We had 18 officers, including myself, that went through that class. We have another class in October and another class in December, and our goal is to cap it around 15 to 20 officers. Just we don't want it to get too big because we like the personal experience. We do ride-alongs with different agencies. Then we have our annual in-service training, and again for 2023, this is covering suicide. This material was reviewed by the MRAC and also internally by the Training Review Committee. We also have additional crisis intervention training for our specialized CIT officers, and that's 4 hours a year. This material for this year was provided by the OPATA, the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy. And the 2 courses that the officers with that designation are going to take are effective communication and safe interaction with persons in crisis, and then mental health response. So that's an additional 4 hours just for the CIT officers. This training and material was reviewed by the Mental Health Committee, the MRAC, and also by the internal training. With this, because it was an OPATA material, we couldn't really change it. It was already approved by the state. There's also some off-site training that we do. On May 18th of this year, myself and Sergeant Crespo are planning to go down to Cincinnati to visit with their emergency call center, some of the people who work on emergency responders on the city's alternative response to crisis program, and some of their key stakeholders, including representatives of their public safety. Cincinnati has a response kind of known as a CARES response, which involves non-police response to it. So we're going to go down and meet with them and see how they do that. We just also had a meeting with St. Petersburg, Florida, where we sat on and saw how they do that down there. Our officers just currently went to the CIT Ohio State Conference down in Columbus. That was on the 19th, so I was in training. I've not heard back from them, but that's always a really good way to network and talk and see what's cutting edge in crisis intervention. We had both the licensed clinicians and our officers respond go to that training. We also have another CIT international training that's coming up in August. This year it's in Detroit, Michigan. Last year it was in Pittsburgh, and we sent 3 teams to that training and heard great things about it. Again, this year we're going to try to send 2 to 3 officers from the division, and we're working on getting funding for the clinicians to be able to go as well. We're also doing some current on-site visits with Cleveland State University and then Case Western. They're both looking to start their own programs or in the infancy stages of it. We have a meeting with Case tomorrow, or on Monday for that. A little bit of our history and why we started crisis intervention. Cleveland Division of Police, we noticed the need to have specially trained officers to help deal with the increasing calls for service dealing with individuals in crisis. We saw the nationwide trend of having these specialized teams who are better enabled to act with individuals in crisis. It's part of the larger community initiative to improve and support the crisis response system in the community and to kind of take away our initial thought of taking everyone to jail. Right? People in crisis, although they sometimes are committing crimes, they don't always necessarily need to go to jail. that's not always the best option for them. They can serve better by going through one of these programs. Kind of where we were and where we are now. The Adams Board started to train our officers back in 2004 on crisis intervention. We took a brief pause in 2015 while the consent decree came to town, and they ironed things out there. After that, the current program of our co-responders started in January of 2021. And the goal of the CIT program is to encourage and enhance responses to mental health crisis with the behavioral health system. We currently, so on our division, we have specialized CIT officers who are working throughout the division. They're in the districts. And then we also have the co-responder team, which is what I'm in charge of. The co-responder team for us involves an officer and a licensed clinician, and they ride together and they handle crisis intervention calls. So currently we have 4 complete teams that consist of the Cleveland police officer and a licensed clinician. We are currently, we actually just finished our interviews to add the 5th team, and we had 14 officers apply for that, which we're pretty impressed with. We work with Murtis Taylor, and they're adding the 5th clinician to pair with that officer, and that's going to be in the 5th district. And the overall goal is to divert individuals in crisis away from hospital emergency rooms and into treatment centers that are more focused and better able to handle individuals in crisis. Some things that are coming up, what's next? We just received an ARPA grant, so we're expected to expand the program to 10 full teams. So we'll have 2 teams for each of the 5 police districts, covering both day and afternoon shifts. Currently, there are no plans to cover the night shift. The data that we have says about I think it's a little over 80% of the people in crisis that calls for service are between 8 a.m. and midnight. So although we do have a need on night shift, the primary focus is during those times. The grant that we received is going to cover new specially marked vehicles for the co-responders teams. So when you see our police vehicles out there, we want to differentiate these, that this is a crisis response team. We don't want people in crisis thinking that the police are coming to get them. All right, so they're going to be lighter colored, the subdued lights, so that you're not going to see the overhead lights on them. The majority of them are not going to have cages in between the back seat and the front seat. And again, this is, we want to be helpful and to kind of ease the people that we're helping out. The grant's also going to cover some things that we need, like computers. And then we also applied and received a COPS grant, which is expected to add 2 additional teams. So the goal by the end of, I believe, July is to have 12 full teams of officers and clinicians. And those 2 teams are going to be utilized in where they're needed. So right now I know we're having an issue at the airport with some homeless individuals. There's a couple news stories on that. So we'd send that team out there for a couple weeks and try to help them out. And also the CARES model that the city's looking into. Again, this model is one that usually excludes police officers and has a combination of different clinicians, mental health advocates, homeless service advocates that pair up and respond to calls. Sometimes they have a member of EMS. I know we've been in talk with our current EMS to see if that's a possibility. All right, some of the current practices of the MRAC, which again is a Mental Health Response Advisory Committee. The Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services, known as the Adams Board, is a behavioral health founder in Cuyahoga County. So whenever we have training, questions, or need assistance, we kind of go to them as they're the subject matter experts, and they're a great help to us. The MRAC is currently headed by Dr. Dave Margolius. He's the new director of the Cleveland Department of Public Health. Currently, there are 21 members on the MRAC committee. They're represented by the Cleveland Division of Police, Cleveland Community Courts Mental Health Docket, the Adams Board, Frontline Services, Cuyahoga County Mental Health Organizations, advocacy organizations, homeless services, area hospitals, and other interested members. There are several members of the Department of Justice and the Cleveland Police Monitoring Team. They're also partners and help assist with this. For our co-responder program, I'll go a little more detail on that. So like I said, currently we have 4 full teams, which includes a police officer and a licensed clinician, covering districts 1 through 4. We had the other district covered, but one of our members got promoted, and so that's why we're interviewing for them. So previously, before I got there, the teams were only following up on calls from previous shifts. So the frontline officers would go, handle a call, fill out a report and a Brazos form, and they would go and they would read those Brazos forms and do follow-up on there. After talking to the teams, they were all very interested in going out and handling live calls. They thought their expertise would be helpful, not only following up when, we don't always have great success when we're following up. The person's not there, they don't want to answer the door. Whereas this time, when they're handling live calls, we saw that could be a great asset to get them out there and the services provided right then. So we branched out to allow the teams to respond to these live calls in addition to the follow-up calls. Our licensed clinicians are hired through two places right now, Frontline Services and Murtis Taylor. Currently, they work on afternoon shift, so they're working from 12 noon to 10 p.m., and that's 7 days a week. I know there was an article that someone sent me that said that our program is only Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and that's not true. With the addition of the teams covered by the grants, our goal is to have 2 shifts covering both days and afternoons, again, because that's where our primary need is. Some more day-to-day operations in the unit. The teams review, when they get in, they review all the reports from the previous shifts. So if they were off for 3 days, they pull all the reports from the 3 days. They'll run the people. A lot of them are familiar with them because they've dealt with the person before, and they determine the best follow-up solutions depending on the circumstances. Some require an in-person follow-up where the teams actually go out and physically meet with the person in crisis. Some may just require a phone call or a follow-up. And the goal is to get co-responder teams to relink individuals to their care. We also have several of our teams that are proactive and will call people that they've dealt with in the past just to check to see how they're doing. We found that very beneficial because sometimes it's just, they need someone to talk to. And when they know that someone's looking after them, caring for them, and there for them, their baseline kind of stays the same, which is great for us. So we can't measure things like that just because we don't know how many of those people would have a crisis incident in the future, but we think it's a great success. Some of the things that we do not do, we currently don't respond to live calls, and what I mean by that is be the first officers on scene, right? Because we have a licensed clinician who are not armed, they're not police officers, so we got to make sure that the scene is safe for them to respond. So we'll have the primary officers respond there and make sure the scene is safe, and once that's safe, then we do our live calls. And then 2 of the places that we there's so many new and upcoming units that we can utilize. The Diversion Center and the Crisis Stabilization Unit are 2 of the big ones, which I'll talk about a little later. We have a data team. We're partners with Case Western Reserve University, with the Gun Center for Violence Prevention, Research, and Education. And that's a key partnership in compiling, interpreting, and reporting of all our CIT stats. I can't talk well enough about our data team. They're awesome. Really anything that we need, they provide for us. And that way we know where we're needed and what we need to improve on. The Diversion Center, which I just mentioned, it's an alternative housing, for those of you that don't know it, an alternative housing and treatment center for persons who are requesting help with assistance with their behavioral health or nonviolent misdemeanor offenders suffering from mental health and or substance abuse issues. The services can include assessment, medical evaluations, case management, counseling, medications, medication-assisted treatment, withdrawal management, which is detox, and then NAMI educational groups and referrals and links to other community services. These are a voluntary program, so the persons who utilize our services are able to walk out at any point. We get some word back from our officers that sometimes they get a little frustrated that they drop someone off at one of the places and they see them walking out before they're done with their paperwork. So however, that is frustrating, but we're planting the seed. So maybe they don't stay there that time. Maybe they don't stay there the next time, the time after that. But at some point, if they decide to stay there, we've done our job. We also have the Crisis Stabilization Unit, a CSU. And these are small inpatient facilities for people in a mental health crisis whose needs cannot be met safely in residential service settings. CSU tries to stabilize a person and get them back into the community quickly. And this also is a voluntary program where persons who utilize it are able to walk out at any point. And then when there are times that our co-responder teams, our units are not available. And so this is where we supplement those specialized CIT unit officers. The goal of the department is to have 30% of all of our officers trained as specialized crisis intervention team officers. And the SCIT officers are to take control of the scene when the co-responder teams are not available. So that's kind of my overview of our unit. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions? Commissioner Pete?
Yeah, just thanks for coming here, Lieutenant Mullen. The last thing you said, the goal to have 30% trained as specialized CIT officers. I have two questions. One is, what does it mean? Like, what's the training that they need to get to be SCITs? And how close are you to that goal? Like, you got 100 some? Right
Yeah,
now?
I think it is 120, 126. So I think we're a little over 10% of the goal right now from where our current division is. The training is an additional 40-hour training. It's Monday through Friday, 9-hour days. Again, we have topics that are taught by subject matter experts for that.
Is there, are you having a hard time finding people who want to become SCITs, or is it just a matter of time before you get the volume?
I think in the past we had more of a problem. I think people are seeing how our program, especially the co-responder team, works and the success rate. The fact that we had 14 officers apply for it, to me, was a great and kind of unexpected. But I think everything is changing, and people see the need for co-responders and dealing with people in mental crisis. Because if they're not taking the time to take them to a treatment center, they're taking them to jail. So it's not like the calls are going to go away. We're just realizing and finding a better way to help these people out.
Commissioner Kennedy?
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to see if you could walk us through a hypothetical with the crisis stabilization unit, just from kind of start to finish.
As in taking them there?
Yeah, just in what scenario would it be used, and then what would happen in the crisis stabilization unit, and then how do people get? I know it's voluntary, right? So they can walk out at any time, but when that whole situation is complete, what
Are
happens?
you talking about the diversion center or the crisis stabilization?
No, I'm talking about the crisis stabilization unit.
Yeah, so a call that we would take them on is, again, it's a non-violent or a low-level misdemeanor where they're experiencing either mental health issues or substance abuse issues. So once we recognize that, and that there's not a need for us to take them to jail, then that's an option that we would ask them. Sometimes they accept it, and sometimes they don't. If they don't accept it, we have to figure something else out. But if they do accept it, they do a small screening process with us. And it's, for the police, it's about 5 minutes, and then we take them there, drop them off, and then we do our paperwork as to what actually goes on. Like, I know they provide mental health services and a bunch of other services, but I can't.
Commissioner Benito?
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Mullins. I have a couple questions, which will surprise nobody. But so happy to have you here and really glad to be connected with you. Okay, so I have been looking through some of the MRAC report. So just so the commission knows, the Mental Health Response Advisory Committee puts out an annual report every year, and it goes over a lot of the data that Lieutenant, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Lieutenant Mullins has been talking about. And one thing that I was looking at, and I think one thing that's interesting about the CIT incident reports that are put out, that the officers fill out, right? It's anytime that during an encounter they feel like there's a crisis occurring, so they fill out that crisis paperwork. And one of the things that's on there is the different types of de-escalation tactics that we used. And one thing that I noticed was that only in 9.8% of those calls was a specialized CIT requested. And I will recognize that even looking from 2020 to 2022, it increased from like 4% to 9%. So I do see that there's a positive trend there. But for me, 10% feels a little bit low. And so I was curious if you could kind of speak to if there's, well, one thing now, and I recognize that this might change some of the data moving forward, and I have another question about how the co-responder kind of will fit into some of that data. If it's okay, I have a couple questions, but we can always come back to me. Or you can ignore me. That's an option as well. But but yeah, so I was just wondering if, if you feel like people, if specialized CITs are being called sufficiently, if it's just that the officers feel like they have it under control. Because even if you have it under control, like there's no imminent danger, having that specialized CIT, they might know more resources, be able to relate to the person a little bit better. And so I was just a little surprised by that number, and I was curious if you could speak to what you think about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Like I said, prior to my arrival, we were not handling live calls. So the officers on the street knew that. They were handling them, filling out the Brazos forms, and then we were following up with them.
Oh, I'm talking about the specialized CIT requests, so not the co-responder calls.
Okay, the specialized, yeah. So that's also another area that we saw those numbers and saw that we needed to vastly improve on that, which is why we just sent out that LMS assignment to kind of give the officers a refresher that we are out there. We do work 7 days a week. We do work noon to 10. Not just on Monday and Friday. Some of our limitations are currently, like I said, we have 4 teams, so some are working, some aren't. Some days we have 1 team available, some days we have 3, just based on their work schedules. So that may be why some of the numbers are low for them.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify. I mean, the officers that have gone through the 40-hour training.
Okay.
Those officers, it's the data that says that the number of times an officer from that team is requested to join.
Yeah, so that's
Okay.
that's covered in this refresher that through LMS that they are to ask for specialized CIT officers when the co-responder teams are not available.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think, continue. I think I'm gonna, call the other,
Go
and then
for it,
we'll come
yeah.
back.
Commissioner Warren?
Hi, Lieutenant. I just had a few questions, hopefully short. I'm looking at this list of specific topics. I don't see, and perhaps I'm not seeing the depth of these topics. There doesn't seem to be a discussion of people with limited English ability or ethnic and cultural issues. If you could point to where in the coursework you can find that. In addition, discussions maybe, I know there's a discussion of homelessness, but of class and poverty issues that may impact the officers. If there's a difference in understanding, cultural difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, currently, as we've been developing the CIT program under the consent decree, we have not focused specifically on class structure as far as in the training. It's a more generalized, holistic approach, not necessarily based on class. As far as I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question? Limited English proficiency, sorry. We have had some training on that in the past. It's not necessarily focused on in Lieutenant Mullins' area. They're dealing more with people in crisis. It is something we're aware of. We do have a policy in how officers should address folks with limited English proficiency.
So if I mean, I'm assuming limited English, people could have also crisis. So what is the procedure at that point if you cannot communicate with the person in crisis in English?
Once we identify the fact that the person is in crisis, we're looking to our CIT officers. The CIT officers are police officers, just like everybody else, and they can utilize and know the policies in connection with the limited English proficiency. So we would rely on them to come in to handle the crisis while still addressing it from the limited English proficiency. We have various ways that we can identify the language people are using, through flipbooks. If you're in the district lobbies, we have those in the district lobby. So we can identify the language they are using, and then we have the ability to get translators.
What is the response time for a translator?
I don't want to say this for 100% because it's been a long time since I've been in a district. But I believe it's through a computer,
We call it dispatch.
you call dispatch,
And
okay.
they put somebody on the phone.
Yeah, there's a 24/7, I believe, service that we contact, but don't quote me on that, I'm not 100% sure.
Well, I'm gonna go to Commissioner Reeves.
I just want to tell Commissioner Kennedy real quick, when we got calls, when I was working in the mental health field, for the crisis stabilization unit, they have to make sure this person is actually in crisis and not just homeless trying to find shelter.
Right.
Because they're there for like 10 days. If they choose to stay there, like he said, they can just up and leave as soon as they drop them off. There's really not a lot you can do about it. But my question was, you had mentioned your focus right now was like at the airport because news reports we've seen recently. That's not how you decide though, is it? Like,
No, I'm sorry. No, we go for calls for service. So places like the airport, which has a rapid system, the train system there, and is a place where people are comfortable. Also downtown has a high homeless and some kind of mental health problems. So we go through our statistics and numbers and not on news stories. I was just saying that recently brought up.
so is it like you get a lot of calls from a certain area? You send somebody to check it out, or?
Yeah, so I mean, if we get a call currently right now, we send the team that is assigned to the district. If we're talking about co-responders, they're citywide. So the team, the 5th district that doesn't currently have one of the other teams will step up and go over there. But yeah, if our numbers are saying that we're having a lot of CIT calls in downtown, that's where the goal is to focus those 2 additional teams. And not, so they're kind of like there to assist and help out on the hot spots.
Commissioner Said.
So I have a question. So I see like you have like these different, special interest areas like, autism, homeless. So I see there's one for understanding adolescents. Are there, specialized CIT teams that just like focus on adolescents or the issues with youth? Because I know that's a big concern in our city right now.
Yeah, we do not have any specific team members that specify only in youth. We do have our youth policy. But yeah, it's up to just youth now.
So at this time, would any other commissioner that haven't asked a question, would they like, Commissioner Donaldson?
Thank you. Thanks again for being here. I just wanted to clarify, you mentioned that 3 of the policies that were filed in October for updates. So if I'm looking at the GPO right now for team response, team program, definitions, effective January 18th, these are the ones that you're saying are going to be updated?
January 18th of what's the year on that?
January 2018 is the effective date I'm seeing. So
Yeah, so those were the old policies. The policies that were approved by the court in October should be out and released within a month because we just did the LMS assignment.
all right, got it. Thank you.
It seems like no other commissioners would like to ask a question, so we're gonna go back to Commissioner Benito, and then we're gonna go to Commissioner Wong.
Thank you very much. So kind of going back a little bit to the officers in kind of patrol and on the street requesting, and we can kind of include the co-responder or the specialized CIT officers. Have there been any, because I understand that you're putting up the information through LMS and help everybody get a refresher. Have there been any additional trainings for officers or, like videos or part of the in-service about, hey, these are the different types of situations where you might want to consider calling a CIT, a specialized CIT or a co-responder?
Not that I'm aware of that we have actual videos for that. We do, once we have a class go, I know we update our roster. We send that to the commanders quarterly so they know what their officers are. and which officers are specialized. We also send that to radio. So radio should also know to send out those officers first.
So, and then that kind of leads into my other question of how many of the dispatchers have taken the CIT training?
That I don't have the numbers. I don't know if anyone else does. Yeah, I know with this CARES model grant that the city is trying to get, I know, I believe the focus is going to be on the dispatcher training. Because our goal is to, with this ARPA grant, is to have mental health officials up in dispatch. So when a call comes in and it's determined that it's a person in crisis, we're not just handling it off to any of the number of call takers. We're transferring it to a person specifically trained in that. And that's going to be great for us because sometimes they can triage that person on the call, and maybe they don't need to send out a police officer. Maybe it's just something that they're looking for different services that can be handled over the phone or something like that, which will take the load off the officers as well.
The other question I had is, so as you know, we've recently implemented 988, and one thing that 57% of CIT of calls where the CIT incident information was filled out, 57% came from either the family or the client or the person themselves. And one thing that I have seen happen a lot with clients is that they will call 911 because that's who we all think of calling 911 for help, and not realizing that there are other options like 988 or like Frontlines, mental health crisis line. And so one thing that do you guys, when we're seeing these high numbers of crisis calls that CDP is responding to, are you guys providing any information like 988? You can get these like little cards that have the information on it, and that could be something that you are just handing to people so that they know, hey, this is another option to call for the future.
Yeah, that's one of the difficulties is getting this information out because everyone is just so used to calling 911, kind of as a catch-all. We do have materials that we provide and hand out addressing 988. I know the Adams Board also is running radio ads on it, which I heard the other day. Yeah, and so that's, our goal is to get that information out as much as we can, and we do have some handouts for that.
Commissioner Wong.
Thank you. I just had a question, considering I'm just more aware of the national statistics that a person under crisis, 25, I believe, to 50% could die at the hands of police when interacting with them. I'm not saying that is the case in Cleveland now, and I realize that you guys have done a good job since Tanisha Anderson. But my question is, considering the high probability of deadly force or even things that could border on that, is there a tracking and audit system, not just when something goes wrong, it's overt, but that when an officer has not fulfilled the entire procedure? Is there an auditing system for that, or do you only check back on the call when there's a complaint from the citizen? Is there an internal auditing system that randomly is checking to see that these officers and these co-responder teams are following procedure?
Can you explain what procedures that you're
whatever procedure that they need to follow in the given crisis situation. How do we know that it's not just because the person was successfully taken to wherever they need to receive help does not necessarily mean that the procedure was followed. And that could be very important. If that officer continues to do that, eventually it could lead to a situation of much more immense tragedy.
Yeah, that's a great question. Our supervisors in the districts and the OIC of the unit, we review our body camera footage. So we do random audits of their previous days just to make sure that we're doing it. We also have, on a lieutenant level and captain level, review of 25% of the officers under your command quarterly that I review.
Quarterly, and then what was the date? The weekly? I'm sorry.
So daily, the sergeants will review the body cameras from the previous shift of their officers. The sergeant in crisis intervention reviews ours, and then citywide it's the same now.
Okay, great. And my other question is, I realize we're using this co-responder model, but there are even more models like Cahoots that have no officer there except for, you know, medical personnel, people with psychiatric training. Is there an active deliberation about the successfulness of those models compared to the police-led co-respondal model here? Is it a method of active assessment to see what is statistically more likely to lead to a good outcome for the person in crisis?
So we are currently in the infancy stage of this. We're getting teams together. Like I said, we just met with St. Petersburg. We are going down to Cincinnati in May to learn about these and to get that information.
Thank you so much. So for the interest of time, Commissioner Pete will have the last question.
Thanks. So curious to know about data sharing. Like, what have you guys set up? I know you talked about the gun center and all the data gathering. How, as we as a body, if we look at this, what data sharing policies do you have, and what data will be available for, you know, for a group like ours, like the commission?
Yeah, I mean, I think any data requests that you have, you can certainly send over to the division. Yeah, like are you talking about something specific or?
No, like for example, the CIT, you know, some of the things we've already talked about, but even deeper, getting deeper into that. The data that you're gathering and the numbers that you're seeing as you do the work.
Yeah, as far as I know, I mean, anything you send over, we work on fulfilling.
And actually, our data team's gonna be up next. They might be able to better answer that question.
That's not a question. I wanted to respond to Commissioner Wong's question.
Okay, Commissioner Benito.
So I just wanted to give some additional information on, you know, what you're talking about is the looking into a care response model, which actually our very own Commissioner Pete has done some work on through his day job. And so he's a great resource if anyone has questions. But the Department of Public Health for the city is hiring somebody full-time. They're on a 1.5-year grant. Funded position that they'll be exploring this and like setting up some feasibility studies of it. And there's also, if people want to also learn more, another great organization other than Policy Matters who's working on this is REACH. And I think anyone who's interested in that, I would also suggest that they maybe attend an MRAC meeting or ask some questions of them.
Thank you so much. It's 1:20 and we want to ensure that we stay on schedule as well as ensure that we're receiving the information. We can always feel free to email or touch base with any commissioner. So we have a 10-minute break. We'll reconvene at 1:30.
Thank you.
Right. No, you're right. So,
We're working on it. But the ARPA grant says that senior strategy section 3 years. Higher money, and then we're just the city applying for a regional grant to look at dispatch and how to integrate mental health stuff in the dispatch. And it's part of like establishing, it's just like a lot of I know, right. Well, getting the city to apply for it and use it. But they're applying for the one grant, and it's not a great grant. It's $550,000. Which other grant is Oh, that,
It was work.
Well, that's why it's going to Cincinnati. Like we organized that for the Yeah, I mean, you look at all the other cities doing it, they have data. Right. And even the other thing, going in too fast. Not always. I don't know how that. No, not always.
I don't like the judgment.
Of a non-behavioral, but physical.
Right. So that happens, obviously. It depends. Not necessarily. I mean, like Cincinnati sends EMS and mental health physicians. It's a program that I'm going to see today. Yeah, other places.
How was your birthday?
It was good.
Did you relax?
Everyone's like, what'd you do? Everyone's like, what'd you do? I'm like, nothing.
I know, because when you're so busy, relaxing is just like, I need this, right?
Like, you wanna go out? I'm like,
Yeah, and I think you still was sending emails too. I was like, oh, man.
things are, it's already slowed down a little bit. If you said that it's always going up and
Yeah, and then hopefully we get to.
then there's 13 of you, so someone always has a question or is thinking about something. The triage, that's where the
I also feel like in the Cheers, could I Chairwoman?
Yeah, let me guess, I need a box prepared.
Can I ask you something? Sure.
Two more.
It's like when people get up, people stand up.
I was wondering that myself.
Oh, and I get tired, I'm like, oh, 3 o'clock nap time.
I was already thinking like, I want a nap.
I'm gonna get a nap, I have to go watch a movie with people. I have to go watch a movie.
What movie are you watching?
They're celebrating Earth Days, it's at their home, they're watching the original Wicker Man, I don't even know.
I don't know what that is.
I think it was remade as a Nicolas Cage movie, I don't know, something about Earth. Yes, like a tree, I think it's like a tree that.
A tree man?
Yeah, 2006. Missing child.
Got it? Yeah, they said we should. I was thinking like resident, like assistant or something. Yeah. I'm making I just wrote resident because we were
research.
research assistant. Yeah, I didn't know if it was resident. Yeah.
Oh, are you gonna tell us?
Hey, hold up.
What you thinking about that?
Eric's question is,
Let's be clear, on the training committee, an idea what the training committee
Let's do
wanted.
But this was good, like, you know.
I still like.
And then we can review it.
Today I would have been here at 9:05.
Yeah.
Hey,
Because
Jason,
at
what is
first I
that
thought it was
building
at
that we
9.
have?
No, but last one was at 9.
what do you miss?
Because at first I was like, okay, I can be there at 9. Then you sent a text. I was like, oh,
And then all that.
Yeah. They released the whole budget.
Didn't they just read this already?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was reading them.
You can't go back that.
I'm going to do a thorough review.
But like, students said like.
Oh, we're gonna have to go back.
Between Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I did what I could.
I didn't figure out how these did the password. I didn't know what that other.
You can come up and
Yeah.
I just read that we have a report I didn't think I was that.
No. I was asking, because I was asking about food and stuff too. Then I was talking to a council person who said funds have limitations.
Yeah, that might have been, if it was before April 1st, April 1. It opens up and you can use it for what- And that's just standard city practice. It wasn't just something all the.
Right.
I am like, I'm about to touch you, man. Oh, you are cold. That's why
Oh, yeah, Don't be nervous. Madam Chair.
we gotta go back on our break on time.
And see if we can work
Pressure on.
I'm doing a good job. Yeah, this is, we're not in stress. But I would love to talk about it. Yeah.
So whatever she say.
I
I said you like the mom, the only one, so whatever you say.
Sorry. You can hear me, clap once.
I know.
Yay.
Yeah.
Is the projector off, PC?
What's that? Yeah, we're good. Whenever you're ready.
Is the projector on?
We could turn it on. Do they have a PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't want to hit buttons. Is the AV unit on it? That's driving. You gotta open. Nope, it's open. It's good.
If not, I'm sure they can talk about it.
Yeah, give it a minute to warm up.
Is that window open?
Yep. It's just warm out there. It's currently plugged into this one.
Oh, I cracked mine.
I'm too sure I can do that.
Thank you so much.
You know what, let me.
So for the next portion of our meeting, we will have data collection and record keeping. We have with us Dr. Issa, Resident Assistant Young List, Sergeant Ball, as well as Sergeant Cook.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah,
Yep.
great. It's nice to meet you all. Good to see you. My name is Jay Younglis. I am a research associate with the Begun Center for Violence Prevention Research and Education at Case Western Reserve University. There's a mouthful. To my right is Dr. Rania Issa. She is the data collection and analysis coordinator for the division. So she's responsible for the team that oversees everything basically to do with data. So we wanted to get together with you and kind of go over what our roles and responsibilities are, specifically in terms of how they relate to the consent decree. And so the data team itself is actually consists of we are the only 2 full-time members currently. The division is looking to add another full-time person. We lost one recently to another position. So we're the 2 full-time data folks working on the consent decree. And there are additional part-time data team members. They are all associated with Case Western, Dr. Daniel Flannery, Rodney Thomas, and Anya Nazarenko, who provide between probably 10 to 20% of the time is working on the consent decree. So our general roles and responsibilities kind of tend to fall into these 3 buckets. So data collection and analysis, data quality assurance, and data reporting, and we'll kind of dive into all 3 of those a little more detail here just in a minute. So there are a number of areas that we kind of provide data collection and analysis, and these are kind of the big 5. There are more than this, but these are kind of the big 5. So use of force, crisis intervention, community engagement, search and seizure, which is kind of also known as we call stop data, and community and problem-oriented policing, or CPOP. The division is tracking all this data, and for some of these data collection areas, the data collection has been going on for quite some time. For example, use of force, January 2018, crisis intervention, February 2020. So we have some pretty robust data sets around some of these areas of the consent decree. We have generated reports on use of force, crisis intervention, community engagement. Those have already been, they're annual reports. They are published on the city's website, so they are publicly available. And we are working toward publishing a search and seizure report and a CPOP report for later this year. This actually might be a good time to kind of stop for a second and talk about the data collection systems. So you'll see up on there that second to last column, which lists the data collection systems. iPro Brazos, iPro Blue Team went live in 2015. That is the system that is used primarily to track, not limited to, use of force, officer injury, vehicle accidents, vehicle pursuits, that type of information. Brazos is a separate system there are 4 forms that is used to collect other areas of the consent decree. So the remaining 4 sections you see there: crisis intervention, community engagement, search and seizure, CPOP. Crisis intervention, that data collection went live in February 2020, as did community engagement. Stop, search and seizure went live in July 2021, and CPOP went live a little over a year ago, May of 2023. So we have, with CPOP being the newest form, we have over years worth of data for CPOP. The other areas you can see, we have quite a bit of data that's been collected over the last 4 or 5 years. The division has has tried to really ramp up their data collection efforts. Data quality assurance is another big area that the data team oversees. So as I just mentioned, there are quite a few systems that are being used to track data. So officers are being asked to enter information into 2, 3, 4 systems, sometimes for one call. So obviously something like that, a situation like that would lead to data fatigue. Officers are entering the same information more than once. Someone fat fingers something, you know. So one of the areas we have to deal with is looking across those systems and trying to find a way to bridge the data within those systems. So we spent a lot of time testing forms, developing forms, and then kind of creating error reports that are being sent back to the data owners, to different units for data correction. We spent a lot of time trying to identify the top errors within all of these systems and across systems, in the effort to try to get cleaner data, so we can do better analysis, so we can provide more data to the divisions for data, driven decision making. Something else we run into is that sometimes the data we need, it might not be in the format we need it. So we do a lot of variable recoding on the back end and do a lot of things to get the data out in the format that we need it, for both reporting purposes and analysis purposes. So data reporting. The division purchased Microsoft Power BI in 2022. So we have been the data team has been actively developing Power BI reports, both for quality assurance purposes and also for data reporting purposes. Those dashboards and reports are interactive and only are currently available internally within the division, but we are working with the Office of Information Technology to get to a point where those will be hopefully publicly available, so that there will be public dashboards for data consumption. In an effort, obviously, for more transparency, we want the data out in front of the public. So we're working toward that. Okay, so in addition to those 5 kind of bigger buckets that we talked about earlier, we do spend a lot of time working and collaborating internally and externally. So right there, you'll see that's not even a complete list, quite frankly, of everyone that we work with, that we collaborate with. We have compliance, district captains, et cetera, all the way down. So we are in contact with folks in the division on a regular basis, providing analysis for them, providing ad hoc data requests, working with them on quality assurance. In addition, we collaborate with MRAC, as Lieutenant Mullen mentioned earlier. There are several subcommittees within MRAC. One of them is the Quality Improvement Subcommittee. We are members of that subcommittee. So there's a lot of collaboration, working back and forth with different units within the division to try to get the data where we need it to be for the consent decree. Kind of our current and next steps. We are currently doing more deeper dive analyses into both crisis intervention and use of force data. Like I said, use of force data has been collected for quite some time. We're starting to do more trend analysis kind of work to kind of identify those areas where there are successes, where there are challenges, and using that information, sharing it with folks internally to kind of figure out how best to tackle those challenges when they do come up. So our next steps, we want to start doing deeper analyses on community engagement, CPOP, and STOP data. Those are CPOP and STOP are the newer forms. So we have a limited amount of data so far, but we want to get to a point where we're kind of doing something more robust, both again to disseminate internally and with the community at large. Quality assurance, mentioned that again earlier. It's an ongoing thing. I really can't stress this enough. There's a lot of effort that we spend on quality assurance, on cleaning the data up, getting the data back to the owners and working on it. The division is actively trying to consolidate those systems. So there is less work having to be done, hopefully in the future, on quality assurance, so that there's more work that we can do on actual deeper dive analyses, because this does take up a good chunk of our time. But the division is working toward consolidating all those disparate systems. Data reporting, said we have an annual use of force report out in 2017, an annual outcome measure report that used to be with the monitoring team, but it shifted to the division in 2020. An annual crisis intervention report that was authored by MRAC previously, but is now primarily authored by a couple of folks from Case Western, Rodney Thomas and Anya Nazarenko. That became part of the data team's work in 2021. We are also a participating agency, the National Use of Force Statistics. We supply data monthly that is to the state, that is then forwarded on to the FBI. So all of our stats are being used on a regional, state, national level regarding use of force. Next, we want to get, like I said earlier, we want to get to a community engagement report, CPOP report, STOP report. And those are all going to be forthcoming within this current calendar year. The annual reports are available on the city website. Number of data collection areas. So right there, there's the, if you do a search on clevelandohio.gov, you can find your way to the public reports. And I just want to kind of briefly go over some of the goals for 2023. There's a monthly meeting, used to be called CompStat, we now call it CDP Stat. There's a different topic every month. We have a yearly calendar. We kind of use those monthly meetings to go over, always talk about use of force at the beginning, and there's always a kind of a deeper dive topic. Like recently, we just had our most recent meeting, which was internal affairs. Talked about community engagement, CPOP, a whole litany of things. We get together with the district captains, other folks from the monitoring team, Department of Justice, and we kind of use those opportunities to kind of dig a little deeper into data and start looking at trends. We are going to be working with OIT and TIU, which is the Technology Integration Unit, on trying to work on, until we're able to get a kind of more unified system, on developing ways to improve data collection reporting methods by getting the errors corrected. We want to expand report development and expand and strengthen our collaborative efforts, and continue working internally and externally to ensure that our data is being regularly utilized for training, practice, and policy. Anybody, any questions?
So I have Commissioner Early, then I'm gonna take Chair Ridgway.
Take the chair first.
Well, Chair Ridgway, would you like to go?
Thank you. What is it, age before?
No, this is all good.
A couple of questions. So I heard you mention that the work that you're doing is for the consent decree, or, okay.
Yes.
And so it's to show progress
I
that
would,
is being made as far as consent decree mandates?
I would say it's to show progress, but also to use the data in a way that can identify areas where there can be improvements. Yes.
So the report that was submitted and discussed during the last status report meeting last month, I think it was last month in March, at the federal courthouse with Judge Oliver, that came from your, those numbers?
No, that status report, the monitoring team report? Yeah. Is that the report you're talking about?
Yes, the one, did you have any input in that? That's what I'm asking. Were your numbers used at all for that? For what,
Yeah, I can go ahead and chime in. So any point in that report, because that report is developed by the monitoring team. Yes, but any data that was embedded in the report in terms of the trends of, say, use of force, any crisis intervention data that would have been contained in there would have been from us.
Okay, I was just trying to see if there was a connection at all to the work you do and the work that came out of the monitoring team. And the last, you have
just real quick on that point. The last, as we go through the consent decree, the monitoring team does their semi-annual report.
Right.
And then about a month later, Dr. Anderson, the head of our police accountability team, she is drafting our semi-annual report. So that comes out about a month after the monitoring team does. And that's developed by us using our data from showing our improvement.
Okay, and I have just one last question. The quantification report that we do from the commission, does that relate at all to the data that they're doing?
No.
Totally
No.
separate, okay. I'm just trying to see, if there should be, if it isn't, a way that some of this data can be used in multiple places without recreating the wheel every time another report comes out that pertains to consent decree and this kind of data. That's it.
Commissioner Early?
Yeah, I was gonna follow up question to that was gonna be, is this data just for the consent decree, or do you use this data for grants and other financial resources to help with furthering the police department?
No, not this time. This is all strictly consent decree data.
Does that come from a different department when we talk about grants and resources?
I believe it will.
Hi, it's me again. This data is used for internal purposes, quality improvement, consent decree. Data that we use for grants may come from our crime analysis unit, which is separate from the data team. And they analyze crime around the city, and that's just a separate part of the division. And actually, our grants coordinator is actually through the county. So.
Thank you.
Oh, you gonna?
I'll just clarify, since I need to be on the record here with this. So data is a major point of contention with the consent decree, right? So there's different versions of how to interpret raw data. So I just want to be clear, I'm sure all of you know this already, right? There are data analysts, right? What we don't see rarely in the consent decree process so far is a lot of raw data, right? We see analyzed data from points, either the monitoring team, which does an independent analysis of raw data, whether it be from them or from somewhere else, right? Or division analysis of data, right? So so how do we fit into that, right? So we are, in the future, another point of analysis of data, right? So I think the key issue here is how do we centralize access to the raw data, right? So that we can all get on the same page, and also have the ability to ask different analytical questions, because it matters the query of what you're looking at the raw data, what you're looking for. So, everyone has a different interest in that data, and what they have set up for the first time in Cleveland Division of Police's history is a lot of points of raw data. I would say probably the amount of work that's had to be done because Cleveland Division of Police was criticized for not being good at keeping track of their own data. So you have to give a lot of credit to the data analysis unit because I think they had to build it from the ground up. A lot of that is all of that raw data and how it's inputted and look for new systems that are able to analyze that, which have never been done before. So that's part of the problem is we don't have a lot of historical data. We have new systems, so we're all getting used to that. And then, who has access to raw data? So.
Thank you, Jason, for responding to that, because as someone who has worked with statistics and data quite often, we know that it can be manipulated to accomplish whatever purpose you want it to accomplish. So if you're doing it here and monitoring it and you're doing it here and the police department is doing it over there and we're doing it over here, I just want to make sure that there is a system at some point that will bring all of this together and we can be on the same page and we can look at it more accurately. I guess my last comment would be, I'm glad to see that you're working on a way to make this available to the public, especially those last three categories that you mentioned, which the public, we are concerned about primarily about those last three categories from the public's perspective. So it'd be good to see that data and the results of that data listed on the website. Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Benito?
I have two questions. So one is when looking at, a lot of what you're looking at is reporting from officers. Probably the majority of the data points you're looking at is, and we also know that human beings are sometimes notoriously bad at remembering things that happened, interpreting them, and reporting them. And that's not any point of untruthfulness, but just sometimes we interpret, you can have two people interpret the same event very differently. And so one thing I was curious about, and, in looking at some of the CIT data, the crisis data, there's some data points that are like, what were some of the co-occurring things happening in a crisis incident? For example, mental health issue, developmental disability, physical disability, homeless, veteran. For somebody who, might have 8 hours of mental health experience, are they really able to, do they know how to identify what kind of, if someone has a developmental disability, what the difference between someone who might be using a substance looks like versus someone who's just having a trauma response and doesn't have a mental illness versus someone who has a mental illness. So I guess when I'm kind of talking about some of that self-reporting data, I'm kind of curious if there's ever kind of an audit of, okay, we are just randomly choosing certain reports and then we'll review the body cam footage or, and just see if there's, what happens. And it's definitely not any criticism. Like I just think that in terms of when we're putting so much emphasis on this data, how are we doing those checks to make sure that the data is accurate? And it could even be in terms of how officers are understanding the questions they're answering. Like we might not know, they might be answering in a different way than is intended, and we might not know that. So I'm just curious how we're auditing that.
Sure. I would say from our perspective, what we primarily are working on is making sure that the data is accurate in terms of what we should be seeing in the systems. In terms of, I think if I hear you correctly, what you're asking about in terms of the interpretation of the events and how those are entered into the system, we can't. That's not something that we would work on.
Yeah, it wouldn't be like our role. I mean, the one thing that's emphasized to us is this information is based on officer perception, right? So, you may have two officers on scene, like you pointed, that are seeing two different things, and that's not something we can control. Yeah.
We can look across systems to see if something that's been entered is entered the same way across systems.
Right.
That we can identify whether or not if the information was, what you're asking. I think no, that's something that we don't do.
Right. Now, my second question is, and this might be for Commander.
Captain Simon.
Yeah, Captain Simon. Like pull up a chair, Captain Simon. But when you talk about the data a lot, it's been a lot of focus on the consent decree, which I think the consent decree requires us to be like developing these systems. And the other thing that I hear a lot is, it really sounds like the processes that the division has gone through has really led to some incredible best practices that have been implemented, and a lot of that has been data driven. And my question is, with so much emphasis on the consent decree driving this, is there a commitment from the division that at the eventual point that the consent decree ends, will the data team remain? You're like, will I have a job? But, will this commitment to data-driven information continue, especially since it seems like the data has been such an important part of pushing forward new best practices.
Without my crystal ball, I can't say for 100%. But I can tell you best practices in law enforcement currently are to have data-driven systems. So, I can't imagine the division would go away from those data-driven systems and using that data, because we have gotten a lot. And yes, we do use it for the consent decree, but it spills over into everything else we do. So I can't envision a reason. Like I said, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say for 100%, but I can understand a reason why the division would go away from that.
Commissioner Wong.
Thank you. So I had two questions. One follow-up with Jason and the other one with Commissioner Benito. So I think Jason has already expressed the importance of getting the raw data. I'm sure you guys, when you audit yourself, you have to run the raw data. So do we have direct access as the CPC to the raw data that you guys are gathering so we can run our own queries and run our own analysis? And if so, how can we initiate that process?
I actually was gonna have the captain answer the first part. I mean, if it's a yes, we would have the answer for number 2. I just need some clarification.
I know that, that we are a different entity. We don't have to go through a public records request and Freedom of Information Act, that, this is really vital for us to get our job done, especially in a timely manner. And I'm sure, data is very complex to handle, so it's always great to have checks and balances and other systems, entities, looking at the data, reanalyzing it to make sure that we're on the right path. Because, the bias of having one thing being said could also sit in the mind of the second person analyzing, and it could just send it down, send it down a path that is not. So did the captain want to answer this?
You caught that first part.
I did not get the first part. I apologize.
Can we have, as a CPC, direct access to the raw data that is coming from whatever these police encounters or where the data is being gathered, in order to do our own analysis and our own
honestly, I can't answer that either, to be honest with you, because that involves our Office of Information Technology and the systems and access to those systems. So I would have to check with them, to be honest with you, to see what the availability would be for that.
Okay, so I can, maybe if I can write you an email, because we've already run into some of these things in our rules committee
Sure,
and access databases. Thank you so much. The second question is what Commissioner Benito was talking about, that it seems that the scenario that she's portraying of interpretation can be resolved in the how the questions are gathered. That maybe because they're done in narrative form, there could be redundancies to check if the interpretation of a question is correct. So therefore, I'd like to know, can we get not only access to the raw data, but to the questionnaires or the forms with which this information is gathered in order to assess whether questions are interpreted correctly and also if they have the proper controls in a narrative fashion?
If the raw data is going to be something to be provided, we would absolutely give you the questions, because that's the roadmap, right, to understand what you're looking at. So that would be part of what you would be given.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. We have Commissioner P.
The data combination, I'm just wondering, and I'm not sure exactly what my question is, but like thinking about the MRAC, and you talked about the relationship with MRAC. My understanding, and there's been a transition with the MRAC because they used to be with Davenport, now with the city. What is your history of sharing data with MRAC? Because my understanding is that data isn't generally shared. So I'm just wondering, if you're not sharing with MRAC, because in the consent decree, I think MRAC is, to you all, MRAC in the consent decree is supposed to be getting data, but I don't know if that's happening. So what does that mean for us as CPC? Because we're also going to be wanting data. So
we were involved with the MRAC for quite a bit. So when I started in 2017, they were the ones that were responsible for the annual report, like Lieutenant Mullen had mentioned. And at a certain point, the data team, specifically a couple members from the East Western, took over. So they were the ones publishing the annual report. But we have, since I've been on board, when we used to hold the meetings with the MRAC, we would always have a data section. We would always present information on I think it was every 2 months we'd have the meeting. We would always present information to the MRAC. So for the crisis intervention portion, right, what we would do is we generally focus on the entire form, and then based on what this, the committee members wanted to see a little bit more of, we'd base the next, month's meeting on. So if there was always data sharing, I would say. And again, it was guided on what the feedback from the group was at the time. So does that answer your question?
Perhaps, yeah. I'm just thinking again that question of raw data versus
pre-analyzed
data. So
I guess to go back, we didn't share raw data with them specifically at a point, because once we took over generating the report, there was no one to share it with when it came to them. So again, the first couple of years, it was something that they handled. It was when the CIT forms were collected on paper and pencil. So that was something that they entered into the system and generated the report. Once we transitioned to Brazos in 2020 for the crisis intervention form, that's when we took over, and we have had access to the raw data, I would say, and not provided it to them after that date. Yeah.
Any further questions? We got Commissioner Wong.
Sorry, I forgot to ask. So now I'm thinking about it more. The raw data, it should be, is there any kind of, because it's in the public's interest, is it considered public data? Is it considered something that is covered under Freedom of Information Act or a public records request? Because it's like, like Federal Reserve data is public data. Do we know the legal, because it'd be interesting to have other people that have analytical skills take a look at the data to see if there's any more solutions that can arise from it.
I don't have the answer to the question. I feel like that was what we had just mentioned a couple of minutes ago. The one thing that is contained in the data is, the sensitive information of the individuals involved, but I can't answer that question. I mean, I feel like once we have guidance on whether or not it's something we can share, we'd be in a position to, share what is necessary at that point.
That would be a leads thing also.
Yeah, so I think for us, yeah.
The sensitive information would be a leads thing, which is managed by the state.
Yeah, I think again, once we're given some guidance on what it is that we can share, for us, there wouldn't be anything that would get in the way of us doing that for you, providing you context, the questions, so you understand what the responses mean.
Any further comments, concerns, questions? Thank you so much for attending today.
Real quick, I just want to clarify, because this section had a lot of pieces to it. So we're kind of just rolling one into the other. What I'm having is Sergeant Ball is here to kind of talk about our body worn camera. I think it's an important topic to at least introduce. So he brought, cameras for you to look at, right? But Sergeant Cook is going to talk from a complaints angle about some of the systems we use to track the data. Brazos, maybe mentioned MCAT. Now, we're not giving you a full rundown of the systems, but at least letting you know what exists, right? It's the same with the data team of what we're collecting. I can follow up with the chief as well about the raw data sets and let the commission know that that's not an issue. But I do agree that there is information we collect that we may not be able, right? Personal addresses, social security, we can't give that out, right? But numbers of incidents, things like that, we can definitely look at. This way, sorry, is it camera?
No.
Okay, so I'm gonna turn it over to Sergeant Melanie Cook, who's gonna kind of give you a rundown of some of those systems.
You're blocking the camera behind you.
Oh, this is the one. Okay, well, I'm getting out of the way right now.
Yeah. I'm Sergeant Melanie Cook. I'm in the Office of Compliance. I'm fairly new to the office, and I got there in December of last year. I was recently promoted in October, so all of this I'm learning as well, quickly, but I'm getting there. Some of the responsibilities of Office of Compliance is the research, development, and draft division policies and procedures required by the consent decree. I'm in the same office as Sergeant Graham that was here earlier today, and I work under Captain Simon here. We develop general police orders, our GPOs. We research policies of outside agencies to find best practices in policing and this division in particular. So we look at other policies at other agencies to see what they're doing and take research if that's something we should be doing. I collaborate with command staff members on various projects, develop lesson plans, and conduct training when there's new systems out there and things like that, or there's a new policy that needs some training. Perform administrative and general office tasks. And then I work closely with the data team, Dr. Issa and Jay, and to generate reports. A few of those systems that I work with is the Brazos. It was mentioned earlier, kind of briefly mentioned that. That's a program to assist in the data collection that's analyzed by the data team. Every member of the division has access to that. Part of my job, I make sure they get access to it. They know how to operate the system. The entries, as mentioned earlier, the crisis intervention, the community engagement, CPOP, and the stop forms. So I also take a look at those, and I'm kind of the go-between with data team. If they're seeing issues or maybe something's been sitting there, I make sure that that gets pushed out to the officers within the districts or the units, that they're getting that done and completing that. If we see something that's coming up, an issue that's coming up all the time, I take a look at that and make sure that it's nothing. If retraining needs to be done, or there needs to be a notice sent out that this is done incorrectly, then I make sure that that gets done. So I work closely with all the different districts and command staff. The other one that I recently started working on is a backup for the Blue Team. Blue Team is used, that allows employees and supervisors to enter and manage incidents from the field. It's a simple step-by-step internet-style interface that's requires minimal training requirements. So, anybody in the district level, if they have a use of force, the officer that was involved in that use of force will enter it, and it streamlines. It goes, once they're complete, it goes right to the inbox of whoever they're sending it to, their supervisor, and they get it immediately. Then they can start reviewing it for their reviews, and it goes up the chain. Some of the incidents that's included in that is the use of force, field level discipline, complaints, vehicle accidents, injuries, any pursuits, travel training requests, and their sick reviews that are done quarterly. And those can be routed, like I said, straight through the chain of command. Once it's completed, it goes right to the next individual in the chain, and they get it automatically. So it streamlines that. Then with IA Pro, IA Pro is a full-featured software that receives and stores information entered into Blue Team. So once it's complete in the Blue Team, then it gets released into the IA Pro to get stored. This information, this system is used by our internal affairs unit to do their investigations. The case prep unit, which handles if there's discipline, that's all entered into their inspections, and the Office of Professional Standards uses this for their investigations. The best thing about this system is, it's each individual that has access to this is restricted by their level of access. So if there's a sergeant who isn't in internal affairs, they don't have access to the internal affairs information or inspections or anything. So you can limit who has access to what, so that there isn't any compromising of the information in there and it's not released. So it is a system to keep things in check and keep track of everything. The other system that I train on and assist with is MCAD. That's our mobile computer aided dispatch. That's where officers receive their calls for service, and then they put their disposition in there, what they did. That's all stored and maintained. The system is also used for their daily duty report, so they don't have paper duties. Everything that they do, their activity, is all tracked through there. If they perform a stop form, if they perform a traffic stop or an investigation, then they're going to let radio know. It's entered into the MCAD. Once they complete that, they let radio know, and then that's stored, and that becomes their duty, so we know what they did for that day. That's another program I think the data team utilizes to pull their data from. So those are some of the systems that I have an understanding of, some better than others, but I'm still learning. So does anybody have any questions? And I'm gonna pass it off to Sergeant John Wall. Yes.
Okay, I understood you to say that depending on your level, that you're restricted, a person in your position or under you is restricted on information they can get to with other information as far as internal affairs. So am I understanding you to say that you, in your position as a sergeant, you don't have access to other information within the division?
So
everything's permission based.
Yeah.
Based on your
position. Let her answer the question, because I want to be clear.
Yeah, so based on your position and what your role is, you have a restricted access to certain areas of the IA Pro. So if you are not an internal affairs investigator and you don't work in internal affairs, then you're not gonna have access to their information in order to keep it consistent and avoid any compromising of the case.
Second part of the question. When you said you don't have access, so the people that have access, do you have to put your ID? Is it an ID number that you put in there when you do have access, like you do with leads?
As an administrator, and myself as an administrator, I can set the access level up within the system. So once they log in, depending on what level, like 1 through 10, what level they have, that's the level of access they'll have once they automatically log in.
So are you able also to see if someone tried to log in and shouldn't be in that login?
Yes.
And what is your procedure when that happens, if that happens?
It's gonna be questioned by internal affairs, and I can't answer what they would do after that, but if there's a log, and it will tell them that somebody tried to access a restricted area, and they can question that person as to why they did that.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. This thing on? My name is Sergeant John Ball. I'm the officer in charge of the mobile support unit. I handle all the body cameras for the city, as well as the MDTs, the mobile data terminals, which are the computers in the cars. So we kind of handle that whole deal. I gave you all a body camera, just so you can kind of see what we're actually talking about and utilizing. And also the category list. So the category list is our retention schedule, basically. That's probably going to change within the next year or so. It will. Yeah, we're keeping stuff probably way longer than we should. But I'm going to give you a quick overview on the body camera system. The city's had body cameras since 2015. This is the Axon Body 3. It's called the AB3. Where do you need me to go, my man? Go ahead.
Camera.
Oh, I do. Here it is. This is the AB3, so it's a pretty simple system. There's a power button on the top. Some of you already kind of messed with it a little bit, right? If you want to actually activate the camera, and once we get on scene or once we get our call, I press the big button here on the front twice. Can you hear that? It's actively recording, so I'm recording all you guys. To turn it off, I press and hold it until it goes off again. Pretty simple deal, right? Big old button on your chest here, press it twice, turn it on, press and hold it once, turn it off. It's constantly doing what's called buffering. It's in the buffering mode when the camera's on. It's constantly recording over itself. What it does when I activate the camera and start an active recording is it captures 30 seconds prior of video and audio. Okay? So we've had some incidents recently where we've actually captured, a confession or something along those lines in that 30-second buffering zone. So pretty neat deal. The other cool thing about these cameras is if I drop this camera somewhere in the city of Cleveland, somebody picks it up, flies out to California, policeman gets it, they throw it on a dock in California, all that information is going to upload into our system. Okay. So once the video is recorded on this camera, it ain't going anywhere. There's no way to get it off. There's no way to delete it. There's no way to do anything. Okay. Once it goes onto a dock, it's uploaded into our system. Okay. Anywhere in the country. The system that we use to manage this is called evidence.com. That's where all the body cams get uploaded into the cloud. Again, everything is permission based. Some videos, if we put a restriction on them, patrolmen aren't able to see them. It would just be investigators, or everything is based on permissions. So the officers are required to tag the videos, so they put the incident number, whatever the incident number was for their run there, location, usually person's last name, and then a category. The category determines retention. That's the category schedule that I gave you. Homicide, sex crimes are permanent retention. Most other felonies are 5-year retention. General calls for service with reports are 3-year. And then administrative stuff is, and the test videos that we just did here, those are 90 days. And they'll delete off the system. Public records requests. People file public records requests all the time. That's a big part of what my unit does. I have 4 people that do redactions on videos. We have to redact all the information of folks, right? Social security numbers, addresses, phone numbers, all that kind of stuff. Currently now officers' faces. any children, gratuitous violence, that kind of stuff. So my guys are redacting that video. That's where they're putting the, the shadows of the black boxes over everything. 2017, we had 45 public records requests. 2018 is when it went live that you could anonymously request video online. We had 464. 19 was 475, 20, 550, 21, 590, and last year we did 765 requests for video. That's not just media requests, that's, insurance companies requesting body cam video for accidents, all that kind of stuff. That's all done online through the City of Cleveland's website. There's a public records request there. You just go online, you could do it anonymously. Pretty simple deal. It comes to us. It goes to the city. I mean, they have to put it in some sort of an email address or something, and then what it does is the system will upload it in the system, and they have whatever login credentials that they provided the city. They'll go in and they'll download everything. Yeah, so they don't have to provide their personal information. They just have to set up be able to get in there with that number. Future, we're looking at dash cam. Well, actually, the city has just purchased dash cams. We should have them, I would say, third to fourth quarter this year, depending on supply chain issues. That'll be 350 dash cams throughout the entire fleet. So all front unit cars will have dash cams. Currently, the entire division has body cameras except for SWAT. SWAT will be getting cameras here pretty quick, probably within the next couple of months or two. That is kind of what I have for cameras. I know you guys have questions.
Any questions? Chair Richmond?
Mine is a very simple question, and
Yeah.
it's probably something that, how do you wear this? Do you put it on your
Yes, I have it.
Is it here or is it on the shoulder? I'm just looking at where the.
It's like on your chest, right?
Just wear it on your chest.
So we've got multiple.
Why won't mine turn on?
We've got multiple different deals. So I would just put this in my camera here. There's a mount.
And according to our policy, officers are required to wear it on the upper chest area. They can't wear it down here. They can't put it on their belt. They're required to have it in the upper chest area where it can get a view.
Commissioner Reeves?
Yeah, so officers have them all mounted usually on their vests. We have a bunch of different mounts. We have a Molly mount, so it goes on a strap, which is pretty secure. We have these are magnet mounts, so this would be like a detective or somebody walking out, so it just magnetizes.
So, because this is a machine, I know it can malfunction.
Sure.
How do we know for sure if it malfunctioned, just wasn't turned on?
So
Like,
everything
does it
on,
go
yeah.
straight from the officer to like another entity?
When you put this on the dock, everything that camera did shows up on what's called an audit trail. We will be able to pull up on an audit trail. It says when you turned it on, when you put power to it, when you plugged it in, when you uploaded it, any metadata that you added a report number, anything that happens on that camera is put on that audit sheet, to include battery power. So when somebody says, hey, my camera died, battery's dying, I can look and see what their battery power was throughout the day. And I can say, yep, their camera died at this time.
Any other questions? We got Commissioner Warren.
So could you explain the capability? I know there's many models of the Axon cameras. And my second question is, you mentioned that in the redaction of the videos, gratuitous violence would be redacted. That seems to be somewhat subjective. Could you explain to me?
So we have a dead body and there's blood and stuff all over the place. That's all got to be redacted. That's all based on state law. Okay.
So I've seen redactions from not necessarily the Cleveland Police that it's right before the fatal kind of use of force is taken.
Yeah, so we would.
Of the
We follow state law based on public records law. If the officer was involved in officer-involved shooting, like if we shot someone, we would not redact that. Okay, per state law. But if somebody else got shot, then that all gets redacted. But if it was caused by an officer, if it was an officer-involved shooting, it was caused by an officer, that would not be redacted.
And then what are because there's one that apparently has live streaming capabilities. Could you?
These all have live streaming capabilities. So these are body threes. So That is a paid subscription, something you pay extra for, where a supervisor could actually tap into your camera and actually view it live on their computer.
I know we had some issues with officers forgetting to dock this. Is there some notification that the system gives?
Yeah.
To the officer?
So when the camera, if it wasn't docked or they dock it later after the fact, after so many days, there's a notification that comes to me.
Okay, great.
Okay, so no further questions from commissioners. Okay, so the last question, for the interest of time, will go to Ms. Bickerstaff.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, what's up?
So good to see you.
You too.
Well, anyway, this is the question I asked about the retention time. That kind of concerned me. So if it was a murder committed and someone was in prison and they're wrongfully convicted, you're telling me how long, did you say 5 years?
Permanent retention for homicides.
So that's permanent.
Yes, ma'am.
That doesn't go anywhere.
No, ma'am.
Okay, so anything else is 5 years or less?
Depends on what the issue is. Depends on what the wrong was.
Okay.
And it all follows state law.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I ask a really quick question?
Yeah.
Sir, I guess I was surprised to see that, the camera beeps very loud when you turn it on.
Sure.
And I was glad to see that, but I guess what I can't understand is why so many officers, are, failing to turn on their cameras. I thought maybe, there was no way for them to know it was on. Is there a light like that, like a red or green light to where somebody can say to their partner, hey, you see that?
Yeah.
Is my camera on?
So when your camera's in buffering mode, when it has power to it, it's a flashing green light on the top of it. And when you're actively recording, it's a flashing red light. Okay. And when somebody's live streaming your camera, they're viewing your camera, it's gonna be a flashing purple light. You said something about so many officers not turning on their cameras. What do you?
Well, because
Where
I,
you get that
I
from?
read the disciplinary
Okay.
reports and officers getting suspended for a day.
So that was
So I
potential.
thought maybe it might
Yeah.
be like a good faith mistake.
It is usually.
Right, but that's a pretty loud beep.
Yeah, for sure. But in a crisis situation where we're getting out of the car and we're running after somebody has a gun.
Okay.
You see them running out. Sometimes you miss it.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
And while we're dealing with the chaos, we're not worried about the beep or anything like that. We're dealing with making the scene safe first. Then we're gonna go back and okay.
Oh, that's right, the radio's beep too, so there's got.
Yeah, everything's kind of
Gotta
a
be
lot of
loud
chaos.
noise, okay.
So I will let you know that we have in our system since 2015 recorded 6,764,781 videos as of this morning. So our compliance rate is actually through the roof of our body camera usage, right? I pulled the discipline reports from my Pro, and we have maybe around 300 to 400 incidents where people were disciplined for body cam violations over that same period of time, since 2015. It's like a 0.00005%.
I just have a question about that number. You said it's 300 to 400 incidents, or like, and the number of videos may not match directly to the number of incidents. Did you see that it's a pattern officers doing it, and how many officers does that amount to?
I would not say it's a pattern. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but it's progressive discipline, right? So if an officer does not activate his camera, gets disciplined. Right now, it's a letter of reinstruction. If he does it again, it's a 1-day suspension. If he does it again, it's another day suspension. Progresses all the way to the point of termination. But I don't think anybody has gone beyond a 1-day suspension. If there has been, there might be very limited, 1 or 2 officers, something along those lines.
Yeah, I asked because I remember in our meeting with Mr. Hess from the CPRB that you're right in this. So the number of videos is mapping to the incidents, but what he said was that it was a 1 in 10. So it seems like when something happens, the percentage number of missing videos jumps up.
We got to understand that anything that Mr. Hess was getting were discipline notices. So everything he's getting was discipline. So he only got it because somebody didn't turn their camera on and they were brought up on charges and disciplined. So it's going to be much higher from his thing. But from raw data, 6.7 million activation.
Well, they might not be bringing up the discipline, like there might not be the complaint. How would the person know that the officer didn't turn on their video?
So anytime there's a complaint that's done, OPS will start to do an investigation. Through their investigation process, they're looking at everything administratively as well. So they're looking to see if the officers activated their videos, all that kind of
No,
stuff.
but I'm saying the citizen making the complaint doesn't know that until
Sure.
the complaint, until the video is missing.
Sure.
So what you said before is that, you know, that he's getting it because he's getting disciplinary matters. But it's the disciplinary matter is not necessarily that the complaint or the citizen knows that the body cam wasn't turned on. It could be from, you know, it might be that there's a correlation or connection between other forms of disciplinary matters and not turning
Sure.
on the.
And that could be from the supervisor's reviews of body cams, right? Because the supervisor's one putting them on charges. So when we get an incident, when we look into it, we start doing our investigation. We see the officer didn't follow policy, then we have to follow the disciplinary process.
Sorry. One of the other things I just wanted to follow up on, somebody mentioned earlier, part of our wearable camera system policy is that you have the sergeants, the OICs typically are making sure that the videos are in the system for all of their officers from the day before. Then you quarterly have the lieutenants checking all of the sergeants and patrol officers quarterly, 25%, so they cover their entire platoon within 1 year. And then the captains are checking on the lieutenants and everybody else. So that's part of the check to make sure that the officers are using their cameras when they're supposed to.
So I guess my question is, in that recent CPRD case, how was that missed for 2 years by the supervisor? Was it that supervisor that was
That
injured?
particular unit was a specialized unit, which may have been the reason why. I don't know. Not familiar with the case.
So it's 2:28. I know we want to stay on track with our sessions. So I guess I'm gonna get a consensus if we're okay with foregoing the last break or to go. Yep.
Let's just go.
Yeah, okay.
About 5 minutes.
Okay, okay, so it sounds like overall we're ready to keep going. Okay, so if the next presenters would come up for community. She just going to.
Why would you take a 5 minute break?
Overall, the consensus is to continue,
Do
so.
we ask everybody?
Well, you heard her say, but I'll be right.
Can't just do it by voice vote because, you know, we do.
This is not a formal thing.
It's like, it's a lot of information. 5 minutes is not gonna really.
I know, I hate to say, yeah.
But it's good.
You don't have a heart. I guess you know what she said, but then she said, no.
Should go back.
I want you guys to, she said, yeah, but then since then, Kyle is gone, right?
Okay.
And now, Greg is gone, so let's just,
What?
now Charles getting ready to go.
There go now, Charles.
Charles, there you go.
I'll hold it.
You can't go until, you have to get permission, you have to vote. So you can go.
Yeah, but just overall, the majority is saying that they want
But
to
it has to
go.
be considered with or learn this information, but you can't do by majority, because they're gonna misinformation. You're probably not gonna have questions, that many questions.
I think we might.
Oh, well,
So he's a good too.
Yeah.
No, I didn't hear it. Maybe like how kind of like the next thing is on topic. Maybe 3 days from here, I get the outline of everything you did.
Oh, we're going to do that.
Another training session.
I just want to line it up now, because it's about to go to summer, so we need to get that's the most important. I'll say that, she just let us know.
Or how easy it is to
Two.
Yeah, what he just said, I don't like people to tell me I can't speak.
I would say any Saturday, probably towards the mid to end of May. I would like at least 30 days out from here to get this time for the outline for the DOJ. Okay.
I guess we are.
Yeah, no, she said they was working. Yeah, they said people come, people went to the rest.
This is it.
Get out of here a little bit faster. But I guess everybody had too many questions. Much Pepsi and too much coffee.
Chill.
That Pepsi, that's that Pepsi.
It's the last stretch, huh?
Yeah, we're making
Making stretch.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
Yeah.
It's gonna make the time go faster. I thought I would be exhausted. You say somebody else too long.
No, I feel like I learned a lot.
I learned a lot too.
We need you now, Mr. Earl. Don't be stepping out now.
I know, that's right. You tell him. You tell him. I got on him, like, I was wondering. I know, that's why you gotta get on him. You gotta hold him accountable.
These are flash drives preloaded with some of the training curriculum. We talked about the outlines of the presentations, the PowerPoints, and then our entire GPO and our robotic curriculum.
And it saves papers.
And it saves paper, it's Earth Day. So you each, there's 13 of them here. So yeah, everybody gets one flash drive. You can always transfer it and then do whatever you want. The city's flash drive.
It's a fast drive
Yeah.
for training.
Wow.
And rather than have paper because of Earth Day, they put it in a fast drive.
Oh, wait. Earth Day? I want to take it.
Oh, you learned
Remember the floppy disk?
Yes, we do.
You can tell it doesn't take much to.
Thank you. Oh, so we really do it.
Anything, any little whatever.
For them to get back.
Is it on there now? It's on there now, yeah. 'Cause
What we're doing,
homework,
what's this?
right? I like to give homework.
It's on the
Yeah.
screen on how it.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Thank you.
You only need one, yep, each flash drive, all of the files are in the flash drive, yep. So you can open it up.
Yes.
Through and.
They have to work it out.
No, but.
You guys are on USB.
Yeah, there's I hold one for,
And John.
and John.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did anybody not get one? Did you not get one? Well, no. She wasn't.
Yours are nicer colors.
No, I like it.
Blue is my favorite color.
You can put it on your thing.
Yeah.
And then
I have it here.
Can we ask what color you want?
You're in trouble.
I know, I want the blue.
I care about the color. We have a lot of Did everyone at the table get a flash drive? Did everyone get one? Because we have a couple of extras here. We have one for Alana and one for John.
Yes, yes.
What do you want?
But we're on the same page.
Wow, yeah, 'cause I got a bill.
Were you not?
No, that she used her phone
She forgot her gavel.
to ask Pete to come back to the table. Thank you so much. So we're gonna resume. The next portion is community and problem-oriented policing by Commander Rose.
It's a good day, everyone. Here at the end of the presentation, I have my email address, so it'll pop up there. So this is an overview. So if you have any intricate, detailed questions or anything like that, feel free to shoot me an email and I can get you what you need, okay? To start off, as spoken, I'm Arnell Rose, the acting commander for the Bureau of Community Relations. Been in this role for probably about maybe a year and 3 or 4 months now. So, some topics that you will get from here. At the end of the presentation, you should understand what CPOP is, understand the importance of data collection, how we encourage coach officers to devote time during their workday to CPOP-related activity, and officers, how they incorporate CPOP into bias-free and procedural justice procedures during their interactions with citizens. How we recognize officers who excel positively and while engaging with the community, and how we also review, monitor, and extract quality assurance from CPOP into Brazos. Earlier, you had the presentation by Dr. Izza. She collects this for us, so that's where that data is gathered, so to say, and reviewed, and she gives us an analysis of it. So just so we all understand the 4 pillars of procedural justice, when we interact with the citizens of Cleveland, we try and make sure that everything is transparent, impartial. We make sure that the citizens feel like they have a voice and that it's fair in the process. CPOP. Community problem-oriented policing is an organizational philosophy that promotes community partnerships and problem-solving techniques using the SARA model. SARA model is you scan, when you arrive, you scan, you do an analysis of what's going on. Hey, what's going on here? You give some type of response, and then you come back later, or at some point in time, you do an assessment and try and figure out the best way to handle the situation. We proactively address immediate conditions, public safety issues such as crime, social disorder, and fear of crime. It is the core of how the division recruits, hires, allocates resources, trains, promotes, elevates officers within the division, and of course, again, data collection. It is the responsibility of all members of the division of police to incorporate CPOP into their activities. Why CPOP activities? The division alone cannot produce a safe community. We are part of the community. A lot of people say we want to bring the community and the police together. I don't go by that philosophy because I'm part of the community. I'm the police, so we are part of the community. We are the community as well. Cleveland Division of Police must partner and build relationships across the community to ensure public safety and address the community's concerns. Now, we have what we call consensual encounters, officers just out and about, seeing citizens, having conversations. These are voluntary exchanges between police and individuals that is casual and non-investigatory. Individuals are free to leave and exchange. These are just casual encounters. CPOP activity, though, is different. It's a combination of core principles and community engagement in a collaborative problem-solving situation. Manner in which the divisional officers routinely and proactively engage the community. It also applies to aligning the organizational structure. So just for example, in this picture here, this is an officer that's having engagement with some students, whereas it may just be a casual encounter, we're just talking, but say one of the students has a situation and brings up a problem that they're having in their environment. This could turn into a CPOP activity. So what are the responsibilities of the officer? They're responsible for familiarizing themselves with the geographical areas that they serve, the residents, the community groups, the businesses, engage in problem identification, problem solving, as I just spoke in that example previously. They work proactively to address those quality of life issues. District awareness. So we come from different environments in the city. Different districts have different things to go on that might be specific to their district. So it is when an officer is assigned to a district that they learn what that specific district has, how it relates to the individual that are in that community, and how to engage without using any type of stereotypes or biases. We do this by presenting the officers in the MDCs, the computers that are in the cars, with asset maps. And this asset map is, say you're a new officer to a community or a district. You might not necessarily know all the resources in that district. So we have asset maps that officers can refer to. Hey, of course, where's the nearest hospital? Where's the nearest rec center? Where's this? Where's that? If the officer is not familiar, they can refer to the asset map and get that information. This is an example of one of the asset maps. Now, one thing we are going to do and we're working on is, of course, updating the asset maps because, of course, things change in the district, and increasing the list or the legend there so that they can understand and see where the different things are. So we have business cards. So the business cards, when officers interact with citizens, maybe a report, things of that nature, they have QR codes on it. The QR codes is for the citizens to have access, and they can do like a brief survey to speak about how their services were presented. And then that data is again collected by our data collection team, and we can report off on those statistics. So the frontline officers, their job is important because they influence job-related behavior. They monitor, see what the officers are doing, recognize different opportunities for CPOP. Again, it's vital to the implementation of CPOP to make sure that it functions and operates efficiently, and that we capture moments as best we can. So the supervisor's responsibilities: to reiterate the importance of engaging and establish relationships in the community. We locate and share opportunities for engagement. District to districts have different things going on. Sometimes maybe due to a lack of resources or maybe a large event or things of that nature, we may collaborate between my unit, the Bureau of Community Relations, a specific district, or it could go from district to district as well. Supervisors also monitor CPOP activity of the officers. They work with officers to improve and enhance CPOP activities. They also assign CPOP activities. Sometimes things may come into the individual district commander's office, things of that nature, and in order to go through the CPOP process, they may assign an officer versus an officer just interacting and locating that CPOP activity on their own. So they review the documentation and the officer's activities. So when there is a CPOP moment and it's recognized via CAD number being entered into a system, officer goes to a scene, they recognize that it's a CPOP activity, and they notify radio, and radio records that into the system and lets them know that it's a CPOP activity. Then it's tracked. So then that is the responsibility of the supervisors to make sure that they are watching the CPOP flow through the activity, because CPOP can translate into something that requires multiple divisions or organizations to be involved in. Sometimes the CPOP activity can go very quickly because it's something simple, something that we can handle specifically in the division. But sometimes CPOP activity may go beyond the bounds of what the Division of Police can do. It may require parks and recs, streets, maintenance, things of that nature. We encourage officers to liaise with other entities for, again, specific issues. It's also the responsibility of the supervisors to make sure that they identify those officers that do a good job, to encourage them to continue to keep up the good work. Also, on the other side of the coin, when an officer is not doing well or not taking advantage of the opportunity for CPOP to correct that behavior, so to say. So again, they assign them CPOP activity, allow them to conduct the CPOP activity in their zones. We try and keep officers, it's the goal to try and keep officers specific to the goal so they could be more hands-on in their area, and so that the citizens can recognize those specific officers. But of course, due to limitation, cost for services, things like that, it may cause an officer to work in another zone of things. And of course, you know, those officers that work in their zone, of course, they will have better or prior knowledge to things that are happening in their zones. So we have things that when officers do perform well, we have ways of recognizing them. We have Police Foundation where supervisors can, you know, recognize that an officer is doing well, and they can, so to say, we call type or recommend them to be recognized for that, and could get a reward presented by the foundation. Also, we want to inform other supervisors as well. So it could be from a different shift, different unit, things of that nature. That also promotes the wellness of the officers that aspire to go to other units. So maybe there's an officer that's performing well in a district and really desires to come to the Bureau of Community Relations. That supervisor can notify me of how well that officer is performing, so that one day if that officer tries to come to my unit, then I can understand that that officer performs well, specifically when it comes to community relations. So again, we advise and counsel officers to specific deficiencies, determine why officers are not engaging, provide officers with timelines for improvement, provide opportunities for officers to engage, follow up with those officers, monitor officer CPOP activity, and contact the training section for additional training if it's something that needs to go beyond what a district level supervisor or commander can do, where they need specific training from Commander Magoo's group. So data collection. Again, this is important because, again, we have to collect this data. You all may get to a point where you want to see the data, things of that nature. So it's important for us to track and monitor the activity. When identify areas of deficiencies, elevate division's effectiveness to see what we are doing, what we're not doing to make us a better division. And we submit this quarterly by the data coordinators from the data coordinator or from the districts to the data coordinators. And they submit information from data coordinators back to the commanders to let them know where they might be deficient at. So this is just a screenshot of Brazos and how what the officers encounter. It's just basically showing the officer what kind of activity it was, maybe a CAD number, and then they can click specifically on that individual CAD number the CAD numbers assigned to, again, specific situations that they encounter, and they can follow and see what happened, where that's going, where it might be stuck at, whether it's finished or not. The supervisor decides whether the CPOP activity is complete and closes it out. And this is like the dashboard, the actual software that the doctor uses, and we input information into so that it can be analyzed. This was taken, I think I took this April 23rd, this past April, just showing again a screenshot of what the analysis would look like, how many forms were filled out, what type of forms were filled out. You see there's several different categories: community engagement counter, whether it was illegal parking, issues that weren't observed, something we were just told about, trespassing, illegal dumping, fireworks, suspicious activity, loud music, loud vehicles, vandalism, assault, citizens assistance, curfew violations, just to name a few, but there's multiple there and more that are not listed. So the Cleveland Division of Police has began collecting community or CPOP activity since March 1st of 2022. A single CPOP form may include multiple officers. So just because there's, 100 forms, it may have included 200 officers in that CPOP activity. So therefore, the number of officers will not equal the total number of CPOP forms. As a result, the total number of CPOP forms and the total number of officers are displayed separately. CPOP forms may typically remain in update statuses for some time, since they generally involve issues that may involve a collaborative or multiple strategies, or again, outside the agency, something that we may not be able to specifically control the timeline on. Again, this shows how many, we have a way of seeing on the left-hand side, you see the status, whether it's approved or updates are required, where supervisor reviewed it and said, okay, but something else needs to be done. Thing where supervisor hasn't reviewed it yet, or it's still just pending to be completed. We also have it broke down by districts. And did the CPOP stem from a community engagement counter, or how that CPOP activity actually came about? Again, whether it was district assigned or whether an officer implemented that CPOP activity on their own. Again, here's another form here that again, we can see it broke down by individual platoons. Again, on the left-hand side, whether it was something that came into the commander's office, community meetings, DPCs, patrol officers, schools, things of that nature. And again, it's just a way that we can analyze the information that comes in. And here's a screenshot of, again, the individual, where you can see what day it came in, the number of days it's been open, original officer that put it in, their name, their badge, number of updates, what zone it was, the street location. So we meet to review this information. So the Bureau of Community Relations, the commander of Bureau of Community Relations, myself, the compliance team, Captain Simon, and again, Dr. Izza, with the data coordinator, review and collect data and identify gaps in the activities, and create a biannual report of our findings and recommendations. We also have discussions on how we can improve based on reviewing the information that was put in. Some things work better. Some things over time we realize need to be changed or improved. Data collection, we look at the demographics, whether or not the encounter is, again, officer related, school related, and different events. So types of officer engagement, again, it could be social contact, casual encounters, mentoring, whether it be phone, community service, wellness checks, safety recommendations, things of that nature, and just regular community problem solving, just trying to resolve several different issues. So there's some things that in the form that we use that are mandatory: description and nature of the problem, duration of the problem, what type of parties, who's involved, the location, the officers, the strategies used to address the problem, the resolution, how we resolved it, and again, and what parties were used to resolve those problems. It's my email, arose@clevelandohio.gov. If you have any specific in-depth questions, you can email me there. If you have any general questions, I'll take them now. Sorry.
So we have Commissioner Benito.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Okay, so when I was looking at the dashboard, when it talked about the different labelings, like how they were categorized of like what kind of activity they were. So I saw things like burglaries and like things that I associate with being like a crime investigation. And so I think when in my head, from what I've like read about CPOP, and I was imagining more things like an officer is out maybe on a burglary, but then they see that there's like the lights out in the street, like the street lights are out. And so then they, and the residents are like, yeah, it makes it really hard to, like, I don't feel safe, like, my car, blah, blah, blah. And then, like, a CPOP activity might be them, like, making note of that and then contacting the city, right, to help get that resolved. So I think I guess is the difference between what becomes CPOP versus what is just like a other criminal matter is if it's not coming in from dispatch, it's coming in through, they're out in the community and you see someone flags you down and it's because they say that there's been a burglary. Or could you kind of explain some of that? And I would also love to hear some like examples of CPOP situations that have gone well.
Okay, so I'm going to use your question as an example and real situations that may occur from that. So let's take use burglary. Which is a crime, but I'm going to switch over a little bit to reckless operation of motor vehicles. Okay, we have a lot of that going on right now. So in the 4th district, maybe in the Lee Harbor area, there's a lot of vehicles that are in the area on certain days of the week that are just racing, doing donuts in intersections, things of that nature. Okay, and that might lead to vehicle accidents, could even lead to vehicle homicides as a result. Okay. While an officer may receive that as a call and go out there and answer that as a call because it's a crime, it can also be a CPOP moment because while investigating, we might find that that's happening every Friday night, right? So they can take that information back to the district and say, hey, while investigating this, I'm finding out that this is happening every Friday at so-and-so time, right? So we create a CPOP moment for that. So now as a result of that, there is a detail, so to say, assigned to that area. So that is a real live situation that is happening. And therefore now it's also a crime. We're looking for the person that caused the homicide, the vehicular homicide, things of that nature. We also recognize that that's a CPOP moment. And therefore the commander can, in that process, in that CPOP process, assign officers or reach out from the district again to another unit such as the traffic unit, and assign officers up there to enforce traffic on a regular basis or for a period of time.
We have, so I do see, so, Commissioner Juan, then we got Commissioner Pete, and then I'll get to that.
Hi, could you tell me what diversity means in terms of CPOP? What types of diversity are you looking at? Like, what does that mean in this?
Diversity as for citizen diversity.
What racial
So,
diversity?
Yeah,
You
so
mean
again, when you go into a district, you might be a new officer into the district. Let's say, again, I'll use the 4th district. I'm familiar with that. I spend a lot of basic patrol time there. So maybe you have one group of ethnic group in one area of the 4th district, but you may have another ethnic group such as Slavic Village in the 4th district also. So therefore there's different ethnic groups. So there's diversity, and therefore that officer has to recognize and identify the different ethnic groups in that.
So ethnic and racial diversity is the only diversity you consider, but there are other forms?
No, all diverse. I mean, there might be economic diversity, there might be class diversity, there's all types of diversity.
Okay, and they are trained in all to identify and respond to all these forms?
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Pete.
I'm looking back at notes from the 12th semi-annual report on CPOP, and there's a lot of partial compliance. I'm wondering what CDP is doing to take it to the next level. One of the comments from a member of the monitoring team was that, there's a lot of engagement, but not necessarily that next step of that true, two-way communication and deep, where it said there was 600 CPOP forms submitted, but the data compiled showed only about half of the identified problems came from the police, and only very small, like 13% from community leaders. So what is CDP doing to take it to that next level? What it sounds like from the monitoring team, really doing CPOP as it's meant to be in that deeper community.
So again, engagement is one thing. The officers engage. However, CPOP is another level to it. So just because we engage may not mean that it excels to a level of CPOP. But there are efforts to offer, I would say, more opportunities, because we don't promote, so to say, the issue of CPOP. The engagement comes from us back and forth, and then through the engagement, the CPOP is recognized. So meaning I'm talking to you, we're having just a regular casual encounter, or we're at a community meeting or things of that nature. And just because we're talking and engaging, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a CPOP. Now, if you bring up an issue, then it rises to the level of CPOP. So CPOP is not necessarily always going to equate to the same number as engagement. Now we put ourselves in more situations by increasing, so to say, let's say our DPC by.
What's DPC?
District Police Community Commission. So they come out and they have a meeting with the district commanders. So by our efforts now, one of the things that we're going to change is we're going to make it a little bit more mobile, so to say, where it might be one specific location where they may come to they may come to the district, they may come to a specific location that's identified, a rec center, a church, or things of that nature, where we're actually going to start moving it around so that we're not engaging with the same people, that other people in the community have an opportunity to engage, which could foster more CPOP activities.
Okay, I guess that's the question. Is from what the monitoring team said, yeah, there's this engagement is not CPOP, so that makes sense. But just it sounds like there isn't the level of true, feedback and guidance from the community that the monitoring team at least is expecting. So I'm just It sounds like you're aware of that, you're trying to reach different people.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's one effort. Again, what that definition is, unless you know what that you're saying that the monitoring team identified that. So depending specifically on what that question is, I guess I'm not really fully understanding what you're
Well, I
trying to say.
guess
Captain
their
Simon.
question is that they don't feel like there's been this sort of cultural shift that they're looking for, and so I'm wondering how you're getting to that cultural shift of what CPOP really is supposed to be about.
There's actually a number of things that we're doing, working with Acting Commander Rose. And Jake can back me up on this. What we've discovered, and we just started collecting the CPOP data, was it maybe not even about a year ago?
March of first last year.
So we've only been collecting that data for about a year. Anybody knows as you collect data, you've got to see where your flaws are. You've got to use the Sarah model, and we go back and we assess, and we're making changes. One of the things we noticed is we're getting a lot of complaints that appear like they're coming from the police, but they're actually coming through the police, but from the community. So one of the things we're looking at with the data folks is how we can better define that form so that we can capture that those are actually coming from, you have a person that walks into a police district, they, let the officers there know that there's a problem. That's getting captured a lot of times as coming from the police when it actually came from the citizen. So we're working to change that. Plus the CPOP form is more complex, I guess. So we're still working with officers and some retraining, updating training to make sure they're filling those forms out properly and when they should.
So I would say because the scope of this training is for commissioners, so I see your hand, so I'm not ignoring, but I have to take commissioners first, and then we will get you guys. So we have Commissioner Early.
Question for you. So most of the data that comes through when residents have a complaint or a problem, does that come through community meetings that you all attend?
So there's it can come from anything. It can come from, like Captain said, where it may not be captured as exactly as CPOP, but it can, again, just through the engagement and the example that I called, that might not sometimes be captured as a CPOP moment, but it's actually being implemented. So it can come from various ways, whether it be engagement, whether it be at a community meeting, whether it can be at a safety assessment or a DPC where there's individuals gathering to talk to the district commander themselves. So it can come from various places.
The context of that was I noticed, like in my ward, when I go to community meetings, we'll have officers there, but the attendance is often low, right?
Right.
So in those settings, that could, if I'm thinking correctly, that can kind of manipulate the data a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean,
in terms of engagement and how much you all are really interacting with the community.
Well, as you spoke, if the opportunity is there to engage with the community, but the community doesn't come to the meeting, then that's unfortunate that information isn't being captured, and there will have to be on both sides an effort to interact more to communicate those issues.
So is there any commissioner that hasn't spoken that would like to ask a question? Commissioner Donaldson?
Yes, thank you again for being here. How long on average does it take to complete the community engagement form?
The form itself, the form itself is a series of, so to say, drop down, pull down questions. So it's a form. It's an extra form, of course, and depending on what type of situation it is, whether it's as a result of, again, a crime, that then you have to complete that paperwork again. But we're not capturing the data to say, okay, it took you 5 minutes, it took you 10 minutes, but it's a relatively simple form with various drop-down menus. But I'm not aware of any data that's captured to say how many time or how long it takes an individual officer to capture.
Okay. And the reason why I thought about that was because as I was reading the GPO, one of the things I thought was that is it possible that community engagement is underreported, just because if that comes with completing a form or taking an extra step, then I was thinking, well, it's possible that some officers may not be taking that extra step to report different types.
That's real life situations. That is something there's always different, so to say, levels and amounts of time, and then it also requires, if an officer, if I can get called out to your house and spend the entire day having a conversation and engagement and addressing your issue, that would be ideal. But cost for service sometimes limits that.
We have Chair Ridgway.
Thank you. I want to piggyback on your question and also Commissioner Donaldson on yours as well. Going back to a question that I raised this morning to, again, I don't always know the titles, Ashley Graham. Sergeant Graham. Okay, Sergeant Graham. When I was asking about how recommendations or changes to policy come up to her office, and I wanted to know whether that data could be captured in terms of what comes from the public, for the same reason, because sometimes those stats would allow us to see how often the public has impacted something within the police department. So if a resident should say, I think this policy needs to be revamped, or based on whatever they have seen or observed or been a part of in the community, and it goes to policy or to CPOP that way, in terms of an engagement, and if it's tracked that way, that it came from the public, that it was a community suggestion that was implemented, within the police department, right? I just felt that it would help us to look at those stats and see how how community input actually impacts what's going on in the police department. But in sharing with Graham during one of the breaks, she described something very similar. That an officer may be at a community meeting, may hear something, and it comes from that community person is not identified. It would just be from the officer to you, or the officer to Graham. So that's something that I was concerned about, whether it was some way to track how often public input would have an impact on the work that the police department does.
So as I had my presentation right here, it shows where we do track where the CPOP activity comes from. Again, whether there's how efficient, as to his question, whether every CPOP moment is captured, or to speak to his statement that if there's an opportunity and there's limited number of citizens coming there to bring the information. So again, that just depends on the dynamic of the situation and how much of it is captured or how least of it is captured based on the circumstances. But we do capture.
Can I put in a point real quick? So one of the things, I'm not a CPOP expert, I'll just put that out, but we did teach it this year, and I worked with the monitoring DOJ to develop curriculum to help clarify some of these things. And what we saw in the data when I sat with Jay was a lot of engagements, right? Over 17,000, almost 18,000 engagements. Over the past year, we've been collecting this data. That's engagements. CPOP's outstanding, we have over 800 that you can see. And one of the things we looked at is if we're getting the feedback from the community, potentially it's coming from these DPCs. That's actually a low number. It's actually a low number of where these problem-oriented policers are coming from, but that's okay. The strong majority are coming from our commanders. And the reason is this: in a district, if there's an issue, who do you call? Typically, you'll call the commander's office, and the commander will direct the activities. And I will say, they did a great job of building this, right? And we do still have some work to go on clarifying and cleaning some of that stuff up. So I like that feedback that we need to maybe track it a little bit more accurate on the front end, so we know where it came from. But that's some of the things we're seeing, right? And that's some of the things we're taking into account as we're really implementing this. So I just wanted to jump in with that real quick. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so, we have Commissioner Wong, Commissioner Benito, we got Ms. Biggerstaff and Ms. Williams, and then Ms. Rose.
I have two questions. So we keep talking about the CPOP form and there seems to be some easy corrections on it. How long is this form? Like how many drop-down questions are there?
I don't know that right
Well, I
off the
mean,
top
just
of
a
my head.
rough guess. And it's not like, I'm hoping it's not like an onerous form. I guess my point is, if there is something that I'm not really understanding the process with the data collection, why it would take so much time to change a question that could lead to a better form. It would just be a redesign of that, whatever web page or whatever the officer is using, the drop-down menu. And that leads to my second question is connected to Commissioner Van Leer. Where is we've gotten some great, stories and anecdotes, but where is and I understand it takes two to tango here. We need contribution from the community, but where is there a strategy to kind of test different ways to increase that engagement? You have a perfect social science model here. They have different neighborhoods that have different kind of diversity dimensions, and you can try out different things. You have stats, you have an easy form, it sounds like a simplified form with which to take the information. You would just assign a certain number of officers this form and the other one another form, and you can get the data pretty easily. So I guess I'm not understanding why the process is taking so long to iterate and find ways to increase this engagement, right? And increase actually also the accuracy of the data.
In regards to the first question, I believe you asked about the ability to change the fields and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
There is not a lot of flexibility to the system, quite frankly. It's something we've run into as some of these forms have been in place for a while, and there's been some analysis done internally and discussions about how do we change these forms, how do we modify them to get the questions, to be more, accurate, or to get to what wants to be, what needs to be collected. Quite frankly, the forms are not very flexible. There's no way around it. It's not as if there hasn't been discussion about it in efforts with the vendors. It's a very slow moving process. It's really the best answer I can give you. There's not a lot of flexibility. It's one of the situations that we discussed earlier with the data team, where the division is looking to possibly consolidate some of this work into fewer systems so that we would have more flexibility in the forms.
Okay, thank you so much.
Commissioner Benito?
I'm curious how it's decided which officers work in which, oh my gosh.
District.
District, wow. It's almost like, I think a member of the Community Police Commission. Anyway, yeah, like how is it decided which officers work where? And obviously there's like when someone joins, how would they decide where they place them? But then also, is there ever shifting, of officers between different districts based on maybe like changing dynamics within the district, or yeah?
So first of all, we would do an analysis of the number of officers in all districts, basically, first of all. And then based on that analysis, then we look at the academy class and the graduates. So based on if District 1 is short officers, a certain number of officers, then of course, when officers graduate, the academy staff would look at that and say, well, X amount of officers need to go to this district itself. That's in the beginning. Now, after that, periodically through the year, officers have the ability to request to go to other districts. And then again, based on the number of vacancies, who requests is, or maybe seniority, things of that nature, then they would be selected from there.
So is there, it sounds like, how much is, kind of representation taken into account in terms of if it's, district that has a lot of Latinos, then is there, if an officer is Spanish speaking, is there an effort to place them in that particular district, or is it more about where the need is and seniority in terms of officer preference?
So it is the goal of the Division of Police to be bias free. So therefore, there's no, so to say, guidelines that this is a Black community, so we want to send Black officers there, or there's Latinos over there. So we want officers to be neutral. So we would not specifically need to send certain ethnic groups to certain areas, because we all should be fair and unbiased.
I just want to add what she asked was language, which is not a protected class. So if a officer could be Black, speaks Chinese, you could send them because of that language, or they're Asian and they speak Chinese, you can send them for the language capability to that district. So that's a separate issue, I think.
But if an officer identifies that they have that specific skill set, if I speak, Spanish very well, and I know that, there's a large Spanish-speaking population in the second district, so to say, that's incumbent on me as myself, as an officer, to say, I think I could be an asset to that area, and then I can request again through those time periods throughout the year to request to go to that district. But to specifically say, hey, you speak Spanish, I'm gonna send you over there. Yeah, that doesn't always equate to that officer being most efficient in that area.
Okay, so we're gonna go to Ms. Bickerstaff.
Okay, I appreciate what you're doing, but myself, Samara Rice, Alicia Kirkman, on September 25th, 2018, we addressed CPOP, okay? We said these recommendations will cover the truth, reconciliation, accountability, integrity, mental health, citizens with disabilities in the history of the Cleveland Division of Police Reform. I emailed it to you. So I'm gonna go through the breakdown and not read them because it's long. We went through the chief vision, recommendation finding for the CPOP, all partners' concerns, roles are equal, building community trust and confidence, mission statement, keep it simple, Lord Stevens. We talked about Sarah. We talked about staffing, performance evaluation, promotion, discipline, equipment and resources, evaluation and CPOP change. When will the FTO manual be updated at that time? Accountability not mentioned in the CPOP. Juvenile children ages between 6 through 17. The conclusion, and this is what we said in closing. CPOP experienced, let me retract that. In the end of these recommendations, there's a CPOP policy needed to be shortened and given more direct details and examples of the causes of reform with the Cleveland Division of Police. That will be an effective plan that will empower the Cleveland Division of Police to be better officers and more respected by the citizens in the community that they serve in. Now, I emailed you a copy of this, and I'm going to email a copy to the commission. The CPOP, we've been dealing with this since 2018. It's been 5 years. And one of the problems that I see, and it's still going on, I see, do you have any regular citizens that's involved in your meetings? Just regular citizens. And citizens that's been impacted by police violence. Now, we turned this into the court on this date, and we did a news conference and took it to the public and talked about this. I emailed you a copy just so you can read it. And to me, the CPOP is still stagnant. This has been going on too long. There's no direct examples. It's very vague. And I want to see the examples, the direct examples. And it's nothing but point at you You just said you started a year ago, so I don't expect, you may not know of this.
Okay, so no, I'm not taking it personally.
Well, okay.
So, as far as getting you maybe, reports on the CPOPs that have been completed and showing you the chain of where the problem started and how the problem was completed, is that what you're requesting?
What I'm saying is, I emailed you a copy, so.
I
maybe-
haven't read it yet, so I
No, you haven't read it,
don't,
but
so I
that's what
can't
I'm
answer
saying.
to that.
So for the sake of time, maybe you read over it. I'm gonna send a copy to the commission, then you can contact me and we can discuss it.
Fair
I
enough.
think that would be fair for you,
That's fair
because
enough.
you don't know.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Ms. Williams?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I just wanted to comment, because Commander Rose and I, we're in conversation a lot about CPOP. How the problem gets identified is important, but more important is how the problem gets resolved, right? CPOP is supposed to be this collaborative problem-solving model between the community members and the police from when the problem is identified until its resolution. The community member plays an important part, and community stakeholders in every step of the way. For example, and I'm going to use an example that you may have been emailed by Jason, I'm not sure. But this is a perfect example. It's an actual model out of, Detroit, Cincinnati, where there was a drug house, a problematic drug house on the corner, okay? Citizens continually called the police, and police kept responding. Every single time there was traffic happening, police were called and they responded. Well, rather than continue to call and police continue to respond, let's all get together and see how we can resolve that issue permanently, right? So that's exactly what they did. Citizens, along with stakeholders, and in our case, let's say maybe stakeholders might be Ohio Means Jobs, Murda's Taylor. Maybe there's joblessness happening. Maybe there's, addiction issues happening. So we bring in the community stakeholders that would best serve in helping to permanently resolve that issue. So that is an actual case that happened. They brought in community members and stakeholders to resolve that issue so that it's done. That drug situation on the corner, it's no more, because we all got together as community along with the police and we resolved that issue at its root level, right? So that is an example of what CPOP should look like from beginning to end. Not just me telling the police there's a problem and then they go and solve it. We handle that together as a community.
Then we have Ms. Rosie.
Hi, hi. So I'm Rosie Pelfy, and I've been involved with this since the beginning. I was actually interviewed by the DOJ for the civil rights investigation because of my homeless advocacy work. So I've been working with crisis intervention. And so one of the things I've noticed in general is that everything seems to be in a silo. And so when you, Ms. Bickerstaff invited me to participate in a couple of her meetings, I made some mental health recommendations, which she included in her report. But the thing is, if you read the CPOP policy, they mention, I do word searches. They mention mental health, right? But they're in homelessness once, but it's just, they're words on paper. And again, sir, this isn't on you, but it's the department. There doesn't seem to really be a plan to really engage these populations besides put them, just put words on papers. Because I've been asking for years in our community engagement meetings, because residents have asked me, is our community engagement officers ever going to come to the Mental Health Response Advisory Committee meetings? And to the best of my knowledge, none have ever done that. And then finally, I just want to point out that for crisis intervention, vulnerable populations where officers are trained on during the 40-hour training include individuals experiencing homelessness, developmental disabilities, veterans, the elderly, youth. And so it's like, how is the city, this is more of a rhetorical question, but how is the city engaging with these populations? Because like I said, it's words on paper. So, and then, the other thing is with these district policing committees, everything I see the city doing, they want to get updates, and it's all about, no offense, but it's all, the police commission, right? And OPS or CPRD. And the thing is, the consent decree created 3 public bodies: the police commission, the mental health response advisory committee, and the district policing committee. So I have never seen all of these things come together and collaborate, all these pieces to the puzzle. And until it happens, I don't think that the city and the residents will experience true reform. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So to move along with our agenda, this is just, I guess, a general question portion. We had a lot of information, so something may have resonated and you may want to follow up on that. So this is, I guess, an extended question portion.
Are you done?
So, yeah, just on the last one, then, again, speaking to your point that you made, that the Division of Police is always looking to offer opportunities. So if there are different organizations within the community, I would advise those organizations to, again, as Ms. Williams spoke, assist the CPOP program by bringing those issues so that we can work in partnership again to solve those issues for the individual organizations that feel like they're not a part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So like any general questions? Ms. Williams?
Actually, it's a comment or recommendation for CPOP. One of the things that I've often told, especially citizens in our DPC meetings, is that citizens need to know how to participate in the CPOP process. And so recommendation would be to kind of collaborate with the police department to develop the training so that citizens understand what their role is in the CPOP process. That it's not just to come and, throw my complaint into the room and onto the floor and onto their backs, but we're working together. And I should know what is expected of me as a community member in partnership with the police.
Commissioner Benito?
I would love Ms. Williams actually to answer a question, if that's okay, if I could pick your brain.
But that was just me throwing my voice into the room. I know.
Because I think I'm still struggling a little bit with understanding CPOP completely. And I think the thing that tripped me up is that dashboard had all the categories, and a lot of them were criminal violations. And so can you give maybe a few? I know you gave a good example of the Detroit. Could you give a couple other examples?
I'll let Jason give another example.
Thank you.
All right. So, okay. So, I know it's already been a long day, and I will say CPOP is pretty complex. So, the easiest way to break it down, which the analogy I always give is very simplistic. Some of you might have heard this before, right? So, let's talk about engagement versus CPOP and how the division sees that for a quick instant. And maybe I could put a different spin on what's already been put out there. Good information has been put out. So let's talk about the division uses bicycles a lot. So you'll see that in the summertime, right? So if I take that tool, the bicycle, and I put a patrol officer on it, right? And they go out and they patrol the neighborhood on the bicycle versus a car, right? That is neither community engagement or CPOP. However, community engagement can happen in that situation, but what we're doing is replacing the way we're patrolling. So most times on that bicycle, you'll be responding to calls and utilize the same way an officer would be in a car, right? So that's the next level of that is if you take officers on a bike patrol and you put them in a specific area for a period of time and they're not responding to calls, right? And you say you're going to be in this 3-block radius and your goal is to just be here, meet people, engage with them, right? That's community engagement, right? That is a specific community engagement activity, right? Now, let's say we're at these district policing committee meetings And we hear about hotspot and precision policing and all these things, right? Let's say we have a particular neighborhood, and that neighborhood is going through where we have loitering, we have some of this vehicle activity going on at late at night. Police commanders are chronically hearing about, this 3-block radius. So what would CPOP mean? CPOP would mean we would look at that 3-block radius and come up with a plan and ask the question greater than just police, because crime might be happening there, right? But CPOP involves more than crime, right? So now we have to analyze what is the core problem here? Why is this occurring in this area? Then we have to ask the question, who do we bring into the conversation, right? And then we create a strategy over a period of time to see how we can combat the problems that involve all of that. Maybe there's some building violations. Maybe there's some street issues that allow it to be more friendly to vehicle racing at night, right? Maybe there's crimes going on where police need to target specific crimes, not just general crimes, right? But you would develop a plan for that whole area with more stakeholders than just the police. And then you would reevaluate that plan, watch it for data. Now, going back to the bike analogy, maybe part of that solution is deploying bikes there over a period of time, maybe like 4 months, between certain hours. Then it becomes CPOP, see? And what CPOP is intended to do is to solve those problems that way. And then not only that, look at it from a perspective of this problem may repeat in the community of Cleveland. So now we already have kind of a template for a solution that we can move. So yes, there's a lot of siloing going on. To Commissioner Van Leer's point, that's what the monitoring team's observing is we're getting a tremendous amount of complaints intake, right? It's like going to these community meetings, you'll see it's like an analogy where somebody asks you to stand there, right? Then they start throwing tennis balls at you. And then they throw them faster and faster, but you can only catch so many, right? And I've seen this at these commanders meetings where people just community members barrage the commanders with problems, right? So we're good at discovering the problems, but now we have to map them out, figure out what they all mean together, right? What role does the police play in that? And then bring in other stakeholders to look at bigger issue problems. What are the core of it? How do the police play a role in it? And then can we replicate that when we succeed in reducing the problems across the city? So far, according to the monitor's assessment, we haven't made that the cultural norm yet where we're able to do that analysis fully. And they didn't cover it. It's called the SARE analysis, but you do have it in your LMS system. So if you read it, you would kind of understand it. So it's a complex issue. It's going to take some time. We certainly can play a large role in finding out, what additional resources they need. COVID set that back a little bit. So recognize that although they were getting started in this, in 2019, when COVID hit, we lost maybe 18 months to 2 years of good CPOP data, good CPOP, good engagement. So it's definitely an area that we should focus on in the future. And we can, when we get to the policy group level, we can, whoever tackles this issue, whether it be a separate work group or whatever, we can really dive into it deeper.
Sugar Ridgeway.
Yes, I just want to make one comment, a little bit more simplistic than what you have described. But if I'm not mistaken, I sat at the table with you. You probably had only been on board in that position a couple of months. Did you come to Garden Valley Neighborhood House?
Yes.
Okay, so we had an issue. You say COVID set it back. COVID could have also moved it forward. What happened was that we had people throughout the community who were disabled, highly compromised, community compromised, and we had all these people who needed food. And they were not able to come to us at the food bank. We met with you. I've been sitting here looking at you thinking, I think I met with you. I think you had only been in that position for a short period of time. We met with other members of Black Shield. You all came, we sat at that table and we talked for a couple of hours trying to figure out how we could serve all of these people in the community, because these were churches that had come in and shared their their need. There were other community organizations. There were people who were working with seniors. So we sat at the table and we mapped out a plan. And I think before it was over, we were serving sometimes over 700 at-home people a month, with the police coming in and working, actually delivering the food in the community. Now, to me, that's what I mean about engagement and CPOP doing that. And they're still, some of the police still working at that center delivering food to some of the same homebound people that were identified during COVID. So in some instances, COVID moved it forward because we identified a need that had come from throughout the community, and we went outside of just the Garden Valley area to meet that need. We went throughout the east side, in fact, also on your west side in some instances, to provide that food for people who needed it. I would also see that as a good example of a CPOP engagement.
And just to give an example of sometimes things aren't captured that way, that was not captured, and we're still doing that
And
today.
you're still doing it.
You're still doing it today.
You need
So-
to go back and fill out a form.
I see Ms. Biggerstaff.
Yeah, and see, another thing too, just like a feedback on Jane, you have to report it.
Yes.
Because one day I was driving and my car didn't want to go backwards. So it was they was getting ready for a parade or something. So the officer said, "You can't come this way," and I said, "I can't back up." So of course he wasn't too happy, so he had to gear my car around. So this is on a Sunday. I got to take it to the dealership. I can't get there till Monday. So of course I had to take it home and park it and get my other car. But I reported that. It was a situation where we was at a how they have that big festival at the 4th District with the parade. I was in the car with Donna walking around. She's a bail bondsman. Her car, we thought it ran out of gas, but unfortunately her truck was a lemon. So we was in the middle of the street and we could have got a ticket, and the officers came up and they assisted us, and we found out that her radiator stuff was leaking. She had other problems, and come find out the truck was a lemon. So that's a CPOP. I'm just saying, you have to report it, but some people don't know how to report it. You have to let them know to report it because that's data.
We got Commissioner Wong.
Hi, so I sincerely, applaud everybody that's trying to help people that are in need, but I'm struggling a little bit here because what I'm seeing here is that I guess I'm not understanding how a police officer delivering food necessarily changes the policies and system that leads to that cultural change. This is not a criticism of serving the needs of the community, but it seems to be that the community's needs is not just giving of certain things, right? That is not existing on the systemic level. It is the interaction. So say, Commander Rose goes there and his officers interact with the community very well. That doesn't guarantee that the other officers, unless you make every single officer in the CDP participate in some of this type of behavior, and still that doesn't resolve the issues. What could happen in situations of duress? I mean, to me, it's just I'm not like I said, Jason. I'm still struggling to see how do we get what Pete is saying? How do we get from this cultural shift, which is quite frankly not going to happen? I'm sorry, with policemen sitting down with a citizen. That is an environment and that's an interaction that is determined to be more peaceful. We're talking about situations with high stress, high flight or flight response, and I guess I don't appreciate that. Certain real traumas in the community are being hidden by very good charitable work, but frankly, that will not actually solve this interactive problem.
That's why people need to be involved. That's why I just said, not to interrupt, but that's why it's important for people that's been impacted to be involved in what they're doing. That's why I emailed them that information, because we've dealt with this CPOP over and over and over. And I understand where she's coming from and saying what she's saying, and I get it because it doesn't. But that's why it's so important for you guys to interact with people that's been impacted so you can understand the full amount. Right. Terry, this is not going to solve it, but what we're saying, it's a small effort. It's not there, but it's happening. This is the thing. We need to get it beyond that.
And the other thing, CPOP doesn't only involve trauma. And it's not only that. If you go back and look at this list one of the things of the activities that's included but not limited to is just working with community members to identify and solve sources of community problems. It's not all these high profile trauma related events that you're going after. I mean, if we are really trying to establish a good relationship with the public, you want to meet them where they are. And where they are is not always at the top of that ladder. It may be at the bottom of that ladder. And if to get to the top, you got to start at someplace. And it's not always those high profile trauma related situations where we want to see that engagement with the community. So I disagree with you on that, Commissioner.
Okay, so it's 3:47. Is there any other commissioners that would like to speak? Because we don't want it to be, back and forth. That's not our agenda. Our agenda is to receive the information, to ensure voices are heard, and ask questions. Commissioner Kennedy? Okay. I think we're gonna move to the next session, which is Commander Magoo.
Excuse me, I do have, Billy, the other people were able to respond, so I'm not sure.
We
It
have
will
a
take
number of
literally 30
comments.
seconds. It's,
Yeah, but Commander
But I
Magoo
don't-
is on there. So would you like to speak at this time?
I just want to point you to a reference. So I'm always in front of this camera. So I just want to point a reference. Arizona State University has done a lot of grant work with problem-oriented policing. I just want to point you to there, where you can take a look at that and get some insightful information there. Arizona State University, yes.
They hold a conference yearly as well.
And apparently they have a conference as well. I didn't know that. Thank you. But that's kind of where I'm dabbling that surface, right? There's a lot of information there. Secondly, I took everyone's questions as we were going through of information we didn't have, and I took notes of it, right? If there is any additional information maybe you need or questions, just let me know and I'll put it down. I can try to get those responses back to you. And I'm going to work with Jason to set up a future training date. So I'll let him talk about that.
Wait, what's your email?
It's mmagUTH@clevelandohio.gov.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Before we adjourn, just a couple of points. Are we done with this would just be logistical things. Are we satisfied with?
we have 10 minutes. I would like to respond. I mean, you've given other people response time, so I appreciate it. The point I was making, I was not in any type of necessarily disagreement with anything with the veracity of these programs, but I just want to say, if anything we do, we're thinking of things like, oh, this is a good idea because some type of mechanistic outcome is coming about. If you don't change, how do you change a relationship? You change the power that is used between the two entities. And unless you do that, you're not going to transform the relationship. No matter what gifts are given, what favors are given, it doesn't change. And this is the struggle I'm having, is that we're sitting here talking about this program and that program, but we're not really examining. If we want to get to the cultural level about police, we need to talk about how people relate to each other. What is the power relationship? How the police choose to use their power with citizens and vice versa. So I want to be very, very clear about that.
Thank you. We hear your point, and I think it's under consideration. I'm sure the staff of the CPD will take that and further analyze.
All right, we've had a lot today, I know, so well, I'll get you out of here in a few minutes. Just a couple of logistical things. One, we tried to capture every question that was asked, so you'll be able to go back in writing and review some of these questions and the answers that the division gave. There's a lot of information on your flash drives. Keep watching the learning management system if you haven't logged into it already. There's read and acknowledges for these policies in there. And then Commander Magoo and his staff will continue to populate that with additional trainings on these policies so you get a better understanding of them. The next tentative date we're looking at to do the second part of the division, which will be our last agreed upon Saturday training. So we knew we had to do 2 of these for the police policy because it was between 16 and 20 hours on paper, right? We're looking at May 20th. So just pen that in your calendars now. And just like today, we expect some commissioners might be, but we know that if we go beyond May 20th, we're gonna run into holidays and summer, so it'll be a lot harder. So so it'll be approximately the same time, yes. So that's one point of logistics. It's not in stone yet, but there's really not a lot of options. We go into the holiday weekend, right? So it's either gonna be the 13th or the 20th, and the 13th doesn't give us as much lead time. So we're gonna have to do our best to make that work. And again, it doesn't take 100%. You know we might lose a few people to personal things or whatever, and that's why we have the learning management and we have that. So the goal is to get through this. Remember, the commission made a commitment to get through this by the end of June, and that's what we're doing. Two other things that came up: a special meeting. We were approached by the city regarding the inspector general position. In 115.5, we are required to be a part of the interview process. They came to us in the 11th hour of that, and they want us to be involved. So it looks like we will probably be having a special meeting on May 3rd to meet the only remaining candidate in the inspector general process. And that will be from 5:30 to 7:30. Again, it's going to be a full commission meeting, so as many of you can attend as possible. We need to have a quorum for that for it to go forward. But if you already have something going on, and then also 5:30 to 7:30 on the 3rd. It'll be virtual, yes. So that's the other element of it, is the candidate is not here, so it will be an online meeting since city council is still allowing that. Next, the last point is city council summoned us on next Wednesday, April 26th at 10 a.m. To give a progress update on the commission. So this is a safety committee hearing. They're asking the commission to appear, as well as CPRB, OPS, and portions of Division of Public Safety. So it's 10 a.m. and all this will be on your calendars and put out, but since I have you together now, just want to go through it, okay? I can see people are getting eager to get out of here. Thank you for your time today.
I would like to do a closing. Thank you to all the presenters for coming today, as well as all the staff for organizing this, commissioners, as well as the public. It shows your commitment and ensuring that we are united in creating a safer Cleveland. The training will be adjourned, I guess, at 3:54.
Good job, Chair.
We did it, yes. I know it was a lot of information.
Only so many.
Let me explain something. You know why we wrote, we created you guys? Because we don't have a balance. And even though, I'm not saying that's gonna solve the problem and those things they do, but we have to give them credit for small steps. It is not, I'm not saying it needs to be where it needs to be. Trust me, because I'm critical of it. But, all right. Right. Did you hear what I said when I was reading this? We addressed this in 2018.
No. They're asking us to. They're asking me. I'll put out the details. No, they can't. They didn't see the full information. No. I guess I'm sorry.
That's a program that she's been doing for quite a while.
No, not you.